Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation, Vol.1 by Rifujin Namagonet, cast by Artale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Prologue. I was a 34-year-old man with no job and nowhere to live. I was a nice guy, but I was on the heavy side, didn't have good looks going for me, and was in the midst of regretting my entire life. I'd only been homeless for about 3 hours. Before that, I'd been the classic, stereotypical longtime shut-in who wasn't doing anything with his life. And then, all of a sudden, my parents died. Being the shut-in that I was, I obviously didn't attend the funeral or the family gathering thereafter. It was quite the scene when they kicked me out of the house afterward. My brash behavior around the house hadn't won anyone over. I was the sort of guy who'd bang on the walls and floors to get people's attention without leaving my room. On the day of the funeral, I was halfway through jerking off, my body arched in the air, when my brothers and sisters barged into my room in their mourning garb and delivered their letter formally disowning me. When I ignored it, my younger brother smashed my computer, which I valued more than myself, with a wooden bat. Meanwhile, my older brother, the one with a black belt in karate, stormed over in a blind rage and beat the crap out of me. I just let it happen, sobbing uselessly all the while, hoping that would be the end of it. But my siblings forced me out of the house with nothing but the clothes on my back. I had no choice but to wander around town, nursing the throbbing pain in my side. It felt like I had a broken rib. The biting words they hurled at me as I left our house would ring in my ears for the rest of my life. The things they said cut me to my very core. I was completely, totally heartbroken. What the hell had I even done wrong? All I did was skip out on our parents' funeral so I could spank it to uncensored lowly porn. So, what in the world was I supposed to do now? I knew the answer. Look for a part or full-time job, find myself a place to live, and buy some food. The question was how. I had no idea how to even begin looking for a job. Well, okay, I knew the basics. The first place I should check out was an employment agency, except I seriously had been a complete shut-in for over 10 years, so I had no idea where any of those were. Also, I remembered hearing that those agencies only handled the introductions to job opportunities. You'd then have to take your resume to the place with the job on offer and sit for an interview. And here I was, wearing a sweatshirt caked in a mixture of sweat, grime, and my own blood. I was in no state for an interview. No one was going to hire some weirdo who showed up looking like I did. Oh, I'd make an impression for sure, but I'd never land the job. Moreover, I didn't know where they even sold resume paper. At a stationery shop? The convenience store? There were convenience stores within walking distance, but I didn't have any money. But what if I could take care of all that? With some luck, I could borrow some money from a loan company or something, buy myself some new clothes, and then purchase some resume paper and something to write with. Then I remembered. You can't fill out a resume if you don't have an address or anywhere to live. I was hosed. I finally realized that, despite having come this far, my life was completely ruined. It started to rain. Ugh. Summer was over, bringing with it the autumn chill. My worn-out, years-old sweatshirt soaked up the cold rain, mercilessly robbing my body of precious heat. If only I could go back and do it all over again. I hadn't always been a garbage excuse for a human being. I was born to a well-off family, the fourth of 5 children, with 2 older brothers, an older sister, and a younger brother. Back in elementary school, everyone always praised me for being smart for my age. I didn't have a knack for academics, but I was good at video games and had an athletic bent. I got along with folks. I was the heart of my class. In junior high, I joined the computer club, pored over magazines, and saved up my allowance to build my very own PC. My family, who didn't know the first thing about computers, barely gave it a second thought. It wasn't until high school, the last year of junior high, I suppose, that my life got all messed up. I spent so much time fixated on my computer that I neglected my studies. In hindsight, that was probably what led to everything else. I didn't think I needed to study in order to have a future. I thought it was pointless. As a result, I wound up going to what was widely considered the worst high school in the prefecture, where the lowest of the delinquents went. But even then, I figured I'd be fine. I could do anything I set my mind to, after all. I wasn't in the same league as the rest of these idiots. Or so I thought. There was an incident from back then that I still remembered. I was in line to buy lunch from the school store when someone cut in front of me. Being the morally upstanding young man I was, I gave him a piece of my mind, getting all up in his face, striking an awkward, humorless, and self-conscious pose. But as my luck would have it, this guy wasn't just an upperclassman, but one of the real nasty ones, vying to be the school's top dog. He and his buddies pounded my face swollen and puffy, then hung me from the school gate, buck naked, practically crucified for all to see. They took a ton of pictures, which they circulated throughout the school like it was some simple prank. My social standing among my classmates plummeted to rock bottom overnight, leaving me with the nickname Pencil Dick. I stopped going to school for over a month, holing up in my room instead. My father and older brothers saw the state I was in and told me to keep my chin up and not to give up and other patronizing things like that. I ignored it all. It wasn't my fault. Who could bring themselves to go to school under circumstances like mine? Nobody, that's who. So, no matter what anyone said, I remained steadfastly holed up. All of the other kids in my class had seen those pictures and were laughing at me. I was sure of it. I didn't leave the house, but with my computer and my internet connection, I was still able to kill plenty of time. I developed an interest in all sorts of things thanks to the internet, and I did all sorts of things as well. I constructed plastic model kits, tried my hand at painting figurines, and started my own blog. My mother would give me as much money as I could cajole out of her, almost like she was supporting me in all this. Despite that, I gave up on all of these hobbies within a year. Anytime I saw someone who was better at something than me, I'd lose all motivation. To an outsider, it probably looked like I was just playing around and having fun. In reality, I was locked inside my shell with nothing else to do during my time alone. No, in retrospect, that was just another excuse. I probably would have been better off deciding I wanted to be a manga artist and posting a silly little web comic online, or deciding I wanted to be a light novel author and serializing stories, or something like that. There were plenty of people in circumstances like mine who did that sort of thing. Those were the people I made fun of. This stuff is crap. I'd snort derisively upon viewing their creations, acting like it was my place to be a critic when I hadn't done anything myself. I wanted to go back to school, ideally to grade school, or maybe junior high. Hell, even going back a year or two would be fine. If I had a little more time, I'd be able to do something. I might have half-assed everything I'd ever done, but I could pick up where I'd left off. If I really applied myself, I could be a pro at something, even if I didn't wind up the best at it. Why hadn't I ever bothered to achieve anything before now? I'd had time. Even if that time was all spent shut in my room in front of the computer, there was plenty I could have done. Again, even if I wasn't the best, I would have accomplished something by being halfway decent and applying myself, like manga or writing. Maybe video games or programming. Whichever the case, with the proper effort, I could have gotten results, and from there, I could have made money and... No, it didn't matter now. I hadn't made the effort. Even if I could go back to the past, I'd only trip up again, stopped in my tracks by some similar obstacle. I hadn't made it through things that normal people manage to breeze through without thinking, and that's why I was where I was now. Suddenly, amidst the downpour, I heard people arguing. Was someone having a fight? That wasn't good. I didn't want to get involved with that sort of thing. Even as I was thinking that, however, my feet kept carrying me in that direction.
Look, you're the one who...
No, you're the one who...
What I saw when I rounded the corner were 3 high schoolers in the midst of what was clearly a lover's quarrel. There were 2 boys and a girl, dressed in the now vanishingly rare jackets and a sailor suit, respectively.
The scene was almost like a battlefield, with one of the boys, an especially tall fellow, in a verbal spat with the girl. The other boy had interposed himself between the two in an attempt to placate them, but his pleas were completely ignored. Yeah, I'd been in situations like that myself. This sight brought back older memories. Back in junior high, I had one childhood friend who was real cute. And when I say cute, I mean like 4th or 5th cutest in the class. She wore her hair very short, since she was on the track team. Of every 10 people she passed by on the street, at least 2 or 3 would turn to look back at her. Also, there was this one anime I was super into at the time, so I thought the track team and short hair thing was cute. Even her less attractive attributes were fine by me. She lived nearby, so we were in the same class for a lot of grade school and junior high. All the way up to junior high, we often walked home together. We had plenty of chances to talk, but wound up arguing a lot. I did some regrettable things. To this day, I can get off 3 times in a row to the prompts junior high, childhood friend, and track team. Come to think of it, I heard rumors she'd gotten married about 7 years ago. And by rumors, I mean overhearing my siblings talking in the living room. We certainly didn't have a bad relationship. We'd known each other since we were little, so we were able to talk to each other pretty openly. I don't think she ever had a thing for me, but if I'd studied harder and gotten into the same high school she did, or if I'd joined the track team and gotten admission that way, It might have sent the right signals. Then, if I'd told her how I felt, maybe we might have wound up dating. Anyway, we'd get into fights on the way home, just like these three kids here. Or, if things went well, we'd hook up and do naughty things in some abandoned classroom after school. Shit, this sounds like the plot of some adult game I must have played. And then I noticed something. There was a truck speeding right toward the group of 3 students. The driver was slumped over asleep at the wheel. The kids hadn't noticed yet. Ah! Hey, look! Look out! I shouted, or tried to. Anyway, I'd barely spoken aloud in over a decade, and my already weak vocal cords had further tightened due to the pain in my ribs and the chill of the rain. All I could muster was a pathetic, wavering squeak that was lost in the din of the downpour. I knew I had to help them. At the same time, I didn't know how. I knew that if I didn't save them, 5 minutes later I'd wind up regretting it. Like I was pretty sure seeing 3 teenagers splattered into paste by a truck moving at terrific speeds was something I'd regret. Better to save them. I had to do something. In all likelihood, I'd end up dead on the side of the road. But I figured that, if nothing else, having a bit of solace wouldn't be so bad. I didn't want to spend my final moments mired in regret. I staggered as I started to run. 10+ years of barely moving made my legs slow to respond. For the first time in my life, I wished I'd exercised more. My busted ribs sent a startling jolt of pain through me, threatening to bring me to a halt. For the first time in my life, I also wished I'd gotten more calcium. Even so, I ran. I was capable of running. The boy who'd been yelling noticed the truck approaching and drew the girl close to him. The other boy had looked away and hadn't spotted the truck yet. I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him behind me with all my might, then pushed him out of the vehicle's path. Good. Now that left the other 2. At that very instant, I saw the truck right before me. I'd simply tried to pull the first boy to safety, but instead, I'd bodily switched places with him, putting me in harm's way. But that was unavoidable and had nothing to do with the fact that I weighed over 100 kilos. Running at full speed, I'd simply stumbled a bit too far. The instant before the truck made contact, a light blossomed behind me. Was I about to see my life flash before my eyes, like people said? It only lasted a moment, so I couldn't tell. It was all so fast. Maybe that's what happens when your life is hollow and half-lived. I was struck by a truck more than 50 times my weight and thrown against a concrete wall. Herg! The air was forced from my lungs, which were still spazzing for oxygen in the wake of running flat out. I couldn't speak, but I wasn't dead. My ample fat must have saved me. Except the truck was still moving. It pinned me against the concrete, crushing me like a tomato, and then I was dead. Chapter 1. Is this another world? When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was dazzling light. It grew to encompass my entire field of vision, and I squinted in discomfort. Once my vision adjusted, I became aware of the blonde young lady gazing at me. She was one gorgeous girl. Wait, no, she was definitely a woman. Who is she? I thought. By her side was a young man of roughly the same age, his hair brown, his awkward smile directed at me. He looked strong, proud, and impressively muscled. Brown-haired and stubborn-looking? I ought to have reacted negatively the instant I saw this big oaf, but, to my surprise, there was no feeling of ill will. His hair must have been dyed that color. It was a very fetching shade of brown. The woman looked at me with a warm smile and spoke. Her words were oddly indistinct and difficult to make out, however. Was she even speaking Japanese? The man said something in reply, his face losing some of its tension. I likewise had no idea what he said. A third unintelligible voice joined the conversation, but I couldn't see who was speaking. I tried getting up to figure out where I was and to ask these people who they were. And let me tell you, I may have been a shut-in, but that didn't mean I didn't know how to talk to people. But somehow, all I could muster was this. Nothing but garbled whining and moaning, and I couldn't move my body. I could sort of move my fingertips and my arms, but I couldn't sit up. The brown-haired man said something else, then suddenly leaned down and picked me up. This was absurd. I weighed over 100 kilos. How could he lift me that easily? Maybe I'd lost some weight after being stuck in a coma for a few weeks. That was a pretty nasty accident I'd been in, after all. There was a good chance I hadn't come out of it with all of my limbs. For the rest of the day, I dwelled on a single thought. My life is going to be a living hell. Let's jump ahead a month. Apparently, I'd been reborn. The reality of my situation had finally set in. I was a baby. I was finally able to confirm that after being picked up and having my head cradled so I could see my own body. But why did I still have all of my memories of my prior life? Not that I was complaining exactly. But who would imagine someone being reborn with all their memories, to say nothing of that wild delusion actually being true? The two people I first saw when I came to must have been my parents. If I had to guess, I'd say they were in their early 20s. Clearly younger than I'd been in my past life, at any rate. My 34-year-old self would have written them off as kids. I was jealous that they'd gotten to make a baby at that age. Early on, I'd realized that I wasn't in Japan. The language was different, and my parents didn't sport Japanese facial features. They also wore what appeared to be some form of old-timey clothing. I didn't see anything that resembled home appliances. A woman in a maid outfit came by and cleaned with a rag. The furniture, eating utensils, and the like were all crudely fashioned from wood. Wherever this was, it didn't seem like it was a developed nation. We didn't even have electric lighting, only candles and oil lamps. Perhaps my parents were so poor that they couldn't afford to pay the electric bill. But how likely was that, really? Seeing as they had a maid, I figured that they must have money. But maybe the maid was my father's sister, or my mother's. That wouldn't be too odd. She'd at least help out with the housekeeping, right? I had wished that I could go back and do everything over again, but being born to a family that was too poor to pay for utilities wasn't exactly what I'd had in mind. Another half a year went by. After 6 months of listening to my parents conversing, I'd begun to pick up some of the language. My English grades had never been great, but I guess it's true what they say about how sticking solely to your native tongue makes it harder to advance in your studies. Or maybe, given that I had a new body, my brain was better suited to learning this time. I felt like I had an unusual knack for remembering things, perhaps because I was still so young. Around this time, I started learning to crawl as well. Being able to move was a marvelous thing. I'd never been so grateful to have control of my own body.
As soon as you take your eyes off him, he slips off somewhere.
Hey, so long as he's good and healthy. I was worried back when he was born and he never cried.
He doesn't cry now, either, does he?
I wasn't exactly the age to whine because I was hungry. The times I let the wailing out were when I tried, and invariably failed, to stop myself from soiling my pants.
Even though I could only crawl, I learned a lot from being able to move around. The first thing I learned was that this was definitely the home of a rich family. The house was a wooden, 2-story structure with over 5 separate rooms, and we had the one maid on staff. At first, I'd assumed she was my aunt or something, but given her deferential attitude toward my mother and father, I doubted she was family. Our house was located in the countryside. Outside the windows stretched a peaceful, pastoral landscape. There were few other houses, just 2 or 3 nestled amidst the wheat fields on any given side. We really were out in the sticks. I couldn't see any telephone poles or streetlights. There might not even be a power station nearby. I'd heard that in some countries they ran power cables underground. But if that were the case here, it was strange that our house didn't have electricity. This place was way too pastoral. It grated on me since I was used to the comforts of modern civilization. Here I was, having been reborn, practically dying to get my hands on a computer. But all of that changed early one afternoon. As the things I could do were pretty limited, I decided I'd look at the scenery. I clambered onto a chair as I usually did in order to get a peek out through the window. And then my eyes went wide. My father was in our yard, swinging a sword around. What in the world was he doing? He was old enough to know better than that. Was this the kind of person my dad was? Some sort of fantasy dweeb? Uh-oh! In my daze of astonishment, I started slipping from the chair. My underdeveloped hands grabbed the chair, but couldn't support my weight, not with how top-heavy my head made me, and I fell. I hit the floor with a thud and immediately heard a cry of alarm. I saw my mother drop the load of laundry she was carrying, her face going pale as she brought her hand to her mouth.
Rudy, are you all right?
She rushed to my side and picked me up. As she met my gaze, her expression slackened with relief, and she stroked my head.
You're fine, see?
Easy there, lady. Careful with my head. I just whacked that thing. Given how panicked she'd looked, I must have had a pretty nasty fall. I mean, I did land right on my head. Maybe I was going to be permanently stupid. Not that that would be a change from the usual. My head was throbbing. I tried to reach for the chair, but couldn't muster the energy. My mother didn't seem so nervous now, though, so I probably wasn't bleeding or anything. Just a bump or something, in all likelihood. She peered carefully at my head. The look on her face suggested that, injury or no, she was taking this pretty seriously. Finally, she rested her hand atop my head.
Just to be on the safe side, Let this divine power be a satisfying nourishment, giving one who has lost their strength the strength to rise again. Healing.
What the heck? Was that this country's version of kissing the boo-boo to make it all better? Or was she another fantasy nerd like my sword-swinging father? Was this a case of the fighter marrying the cleric? But as I thought that, my mother's hand shone with a dim light, and the pain in my head was instantly gone. Wah!
There we go. All better. You know, Mommy used to be a pretty famous adventurer.
My mind reeled in confusion, various terms whirling through my mind. Sword, fighter, adventurer, healing, incantation, cleric. Seriously, what just happened?
My father, having heard my mother's earlier scream, poked his head through the window.
What's the matter?
Honey, you have to be more attentive. Rudy managed to climb up onto the chair. He could have been seriously hurt.
Hey, boys. Will be boys. Kids got a lot of energy.
This sort of back and forth was pretty common with my parents. But this time, my mother wasn't simply backing down, probably because of how I'd hit my head.
Honey, he isn't even a year old yet. Would it kill you to show some more concern?
It's like I said. Falling and stumbling and getting bumps and bruises is how kids grow up to be tough. Besides, if he does get hurt, you can just heal him.
I'm just worried that he might get hurt so badly that I can't heal him.
He'll be fine.
My mother clutched me more tightly, her face going red.
You were worried early on about how he wouldn't cry. If he's this much of a little scamp, then he'll be fine.
And then he leaned in to give my mother a kiss. All right, you two. Get a room, will ya? After that, my parents took me into the other room to put me to bed, then headed upstairs to make me a baby brother or sister. I could tell because I could hear the creaking and moaning coming from the second floor. I guess there was life outside the internet, and also magic.
In the wake of all that, I paid extra close attention to the conversations my parents had with one another and the help. In so doing, I noticed them using a lot of words I wasn't familiar with. Most of these were the names of countries and regions and territories, all clearly proper nouns that I'd never heard before. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but by this point, that could only mean one thing. I wasn't on Earth anymore. I was in a different world, a world of swords and sorcery. And it occurred to me, if I lived in this world, I could do all those things too. After all, this was a place of high fantasy, one that didn't obey the same rules of common sense as my past life. I could live as a typical person, doing the typical things for this world. Where I stumbled, I would get back up, dust myself off, and forge onward. My former self had died full of regret, died feeling frustrated at his powerlessness and how he'd never accomplished anything. But now I knew all of my missteps. With all the knowledge and experience from my past life, I could finally do it. I could finally live life right. Chapter 2. The Creeped Out Maid. Lilia used to be a royal handmaiden for the Asura Palace harem. In addition to her usual duties as a lady-in-waiting, the role also called for her to act as a guardswoman. She'd been expected to take up arms and come to her master's defense should the need arise. She was devoted to her duties and carried out her job as handmaiden without flaw or fail. When it came to her role as a fighter, however, her skill with a sword was merely adequate at best. As a result, Lilia found herself wholly outmatched when an assassin struck at the newborn princess, her opponent's dagger catching her in the leg. The blade had been coated with poison, the sort meant to kill even a member of the royal family, a troublesome toxin that could not be cured by purifying magic. Thanks to the wound being promptly tended to by healing magic, and a doctor's attempts at neutralizing the poison, Leah had managed to survive, but there were lingering after effects. They didn't pose an impediment to her daily life, but she could no longer run at any real speed, her gait reduced to a clumsy stagger. Lilia's life as a warrior had come to an end. The palace promptly discharged her from her position. Lilia understood why perfectly well. It only made sense to lose a job she was no longer able to perform. Although this left her unable to pay even her basic living expenses, given her position in the court, she considered herself lucky not to have been executed in secret. And so Lilia left the capital. The mastermind behind the princess's assassination attempt was still to be found. As someone familiar with the palace harem's inner workings, Lilia was well aware that she was a likely target, or perhaps had the palace set her free to lure out whoever was behind this plot. When she'd been brought into the court, she'd been curious why they'd taken on a low-born woman such as herself. Perhaps they wanted to hire a simple maid who could easily be disposed of. Whatever the case, for her own safety, Lilia needed to get as far away from the capital as she could. Regardless of whether the palace really was using her as bait, she no longer had any standing orders, no longer had anything holding her back. She no longer felt any sense of obligation to her old life. After taking a series of stagecoaches, Lilia arrived at the Fito region, a vast agricultural area on the borders of the kingdom. Apart from the citadel of Roa, the city where the local lord resided, the region was little more than a grand expanse of wheat fields. It was here that Lilia decided she'd look for work. With her leg impaired, a career as a fighter was now off the table. She could conceivably still teach swordsmanship, but she preferred to find work as an attendant, mainly because it paid much better. Here on the outskirts of the kingdom, there were plenty of people who could wield a blade and teach others how to do the same. There were far fewer people who were fully trained royal maids, capable of overseeing the running of an entire household. Even if the pay was lower than she hoped, money was still money. Being hired as a handmaiden by the Lord of Fitoa, or even the high-ranking nobles who served him, was a dicey prospect. The people in those circles had a pipeline right back to the capital. If they found out she was a former handmaiden who'd attended the royal harem, she stood a good chance of being caught up in someone else's political machinations. Lilia wanted no part of that. She'd already had one brush with death, and that was enough for her. No offense to the princess, but Lilia was going to do what she wanted, someplace far away from the war of succession. The issue was that less wealthy families couldn't afford to retain her services. Finding a place that was both safe and still paid decently proved rather difficult.
After a month of wandering about Fitoa, Leah finally came across a job posting that caught her eye. A low-ranking knight in Buena Village was looking for a housekeeper.
The posting specified that they were looking for someone with experience in raising children, who could also act as midwife. Buena Village was a small hamlet on the far edge of the Fitoa region. It was out in the middle of nowhere, even by middle-of-nowhere standards. The location was inconvenient, but otherwise, it was everything Lilia had been looking for. Her employer being a knight, even a low-ranking one, was another unexpected boon. It was the employer's name, though, that really got her attention. It was one that Lilia recognized, Paul Greyrat. Paul was another student of Lilia's former master. One day, back when she had been studying swordplay, the lazy, no-good son of a noble family had turned up at the training hall. Evidently, he'd been disowned by his father in the wake of a fight, and would now be studying the sword while sleeping at the hall. Paul had also studied swordplay at home, so despite having practiced a different style, it wasn't long before his abilities surpassed Lilia's. She was less than amused by that, but chalked it up to her own lack.
Paul, on the other hand, positively radiated talent. One day, however, he abruptly left the training hall after causing some kind of big stir for reasons unknown to Lilia. He left with one final declaration: "I'm going to become an adventurer." The man was like a hurricane. It had been 7 years since Lilia had last seen Paul, and not only had he become a knight since then, but now he was also married?
Lilia could scarcely believe it. She didn't know what ups and downs he had been through, but if he was still the man she remembered, then he wasn't a bad fellow at all. If he knew she was in trouble, he'd probably help her out, and if he didn't, well, she'd just have to dredge up some stuff from the past. She had several stories up her sleeve to use as bargaining chips if she needed to. Having done that bit of mercenary calculus in her mind, Lilia headed for Buena Village. Paul welcomed Lilia with open arms. His wife, Zenith, was due soon, and the couple was quite frazzled. Lilia had the essential technical know-how from seeing to the birth and rearing of the princess. Plus, she was a familiar face that one of them could vouch for. The family was happy to have her aboard. Also, the pay was better than Lilia had been hoping for. To her, it was like a dream come true. And then the child was born. The birth itself was problem-free, with everything proceeding as it should according to Lilia's training. Even at the junctures where one could typically expect complications, everything went smoothly. But once he was born, the child did not cry. Lilia broke into a cold sweat. The infant's face was expressionless, his nose and mouth having expelled amniotic fluid, and he made no sound. For a moment, he looked like he might have been stillborn, but when Lilia reached out, she could feel the baby's warm pulse and the movements of his breathing. Still, he did not cry. Lilia remembered something she'd heard from one of the handmaidens who'd taught her. Children who didn't cry at birth tended to have a host of abnormalities. At that very instant, however, her thoughts were interrupted. Ah! Wah! The baby turned his face toward Lilia, his expression slack, burbling random sounds. Relief washed over Lilia. She didn't quite know why, but it seemed like things were going to be okay. The child was given the name Rudeus, and what an unsettling child he was. He never cried. and never made a fuss. It might just have been that he was physically frail, but that notion was soon proven false. Once Rudeus learned to crawl, he began to make his way anywhere and everywhere around the house. The kitchen, the back door, the supply shed, the cleaning closet, the fireplace, and so on. Sometimes, somehow, he even made his way to the second floor. As soon as anyone took their eyes off him, he was gone. Regardless, he would inevitably be found within the house. For some reason, Rudeus never ventured outside. He'd look out the windows, but perhaps he was still too scared to leave the house. Leela wasn't sure when she developed an instinctual fear of the child. Was it around then, with him slipping away whenever unobserved, always needing to be tracked down? Rudeus was always smiling, whether he was in the kitchen staring at vegetables, or at the flickering of a candle in its holder, or at unwashed undergarments. He was always burbling under his breath, chuckling as an unsettling grin rose to his face. It was the kind of grin that viscerally repulsed Lilia. It reminded her of the smiles she'd gotten from a particular cabinet minister as she made her way between the harem and the royal palace in the past. He was a bald man, his smooth head gleaming in the sunlight and his corpulent belly wobbling as he walked. Rudeus's smile resembled the grin on the minister's face when he eyed Lilia's chest. A smile like that coming from a mere baby. What happened when Lilia picked Rudeus up was particularly worrisome. His nostrils flared, the corners of his mouth drew up, and he'd start panting and bury his face against her bosom. His throat would twitch as he made weird, gleeful little giggles. It was enough to send a chill down Lilia's spine, almost to the point where she wanted to reflexively hurl the boy to the floor. The child showed absolutely no affection. That smile of his was, quite simply, creepy. The same smile as that cabinet minister, who was rumored to have purchased a number of young women as slaves. And this was an infant smiling like that. Nothing could be more unsettling. Lilia felt she was bodily at risk from a baby. She could only wonder why this child was so strange. Was he possessed by something malevolent? Had some curse been laid upon him? When she considered those possibilities, Leah knew she couldn't stand idly by. She rushed to the store, spending a small sum on what she needed. Then, when the Greyrats were asleep, and without asking Paul for his permission, she performed a traditional charm of banishment from her homeland. When Lilia picked Rudeus up the next day, she was certain it hadn't worked. The baby still had the same unsettling aura. Just the look on his face was enough to give her the creeps. Zenith herself had often said things like, "When that boy's feeding, he really goes at it, doesn't he?" She was completely unperturbed by the whole thing. Even Paul, a man of weak principles, who was something of a womanizer, didn't give off vibes like his son did. The boy didn't even line up with his own parentage. Lilia had once heard a story in the palace harem, back when the Asuran prince was still a baby. He'd crawl all around the harem grounds, night after night. It turned out he was possessed by a demon. Not knowing this, one of the attendants picked him up, and he pulled out a knife he'd hidden being his back and killed her by stabbing her in the heart. It was a frightful story. And Rudeus was just like that. Lilia had no doubts. This was another case of demonic possession. Oh, the boy was calm and placid now. But once the demon within him awoke, he'd make his way through the house while the family was asleep and kill them all one by one. Lilia had been far, far too hasty. She never should have taken this job. At some point, she knew she was going to be attacked. She was, after all, the type to take superstitions quite seriously. And so, Lilia lived in fear for the first year or so. At some point, however, Rudeus's ever-unpredictable behavior changed. Instead of disappearing and reappearing at random, he stayed holed up in Paul's study in one corner of the second floor. Well, perhaps study was a generous word for a simple room that housed a few books. Rudeus would shut himself in there and not come out. One day, Lilia took a quick peek and there he was, staring fixedly at a book and muttering to himself. What he was saying didn't sound like words, not words from the common language on the central continent at least. Besides, he was too young to be talking already, and certainly nobody had taught him to read, which meant the boy was just looking at the books, not reading them, while making random sounds. For it to be anything else would just be weird. Even so, Rudeus sounded like he was speaking with an actual meaningful cadence for some reason, and it looked like he understood the content of the book he was looking at. That's so strange, Leah thought as she watched secretively through the crack in the door. And yet, she strangely felt none of her usual revulsion toward him. Ever since the boy had taken to hiding away in the study, his hard-to-define unsettling oddness had abated a fair bit. Oh, he'd still occasionally laugh or smile creepily, sure, but Lilia didn't get chills whenever she held him anymore. He had stopped burying his face in her chest and panting. Why had she been so unsettled by him anyway? In recent days, she'd gotten a sense of earnestness and diligence from him that she was loath to interfere with. Lilia spoke with Zenith about it, and she'd apparently gotten the same impression. From that point on, Lilia figured it was best to leave the boy be. It was an odd feeling. Leaving an infant alone wasn't something responsible adults did. But now, intelligence glimmered in Rudeus's eyes. In contrast to mere months ago when there had only been a crude dullness, and there was the gleam of a resolute will to go with that intellectual brightness. What should they do? Nothing in Lilia's meager experience had given her the tools to make the right decision here. There's no one right way to raise a child, she'd been told. Had that been from one of the older royal handmaidens, or perhaps her mother? At least there was nothing too off or unsettling about the boy now. Nothing to fear. In the end, Lilia decided to leave well enough alone. Any interference might cause the boy to revert to the way he'd been before. Chapter 3. A Textbook of Magic. It had been roughly 2 years since I'd been reincarnated. My legs had finally developed enough that I could walk. Also, I was finally able to speak this world's language. Having decided to give my life an honest shot this time, I first needed to make a plan. What had I lacked in my previous life? Study, exercise, and technique. That's what. As a baby, however, there wasn't much I could do. Nothing much beyond burying my face in someone's chest when I was picked up anyway. Whenever I did that to the maid, she made no attempt to mask the displeasure on her face. Clearly, she wasn't a fan of children. Figuring that exercise was something that could wait, I began learning to read books around the house. The study of language is a crucial thing. Almost 100% of Japanese people are literate in their own language, but many of them neglect their study of English or hesitate to interact with people when abroad, so much so that the ability to speak a foreign language is a valued skill. With that in mind, I decided to make this world's writing system my first subject. There were only 5 books in our house. I didn't know if that was because books were expensive in this world or because Paul and Zenith weren't big readers. Probably some combination of both. As someone who used to own a collection of several thousand books, even if they were all light novels, the situation was tough to come to grips with. Still, even 5 books were enough material to learn how to read. The language of this world was close to Japanese, so I was able to pick it up quickly enough. The written characters were completely different, but the grammar was close to what I was familiar with, which thankfully meant I mostly needed to learn vocabulary, a good chunk of which I'd already been exposed to. My father would read to me, which allowed me to readily pick up words. My new self being better at learning things probably had something to do with it, too. Once I could read, I found the contents of our books pretty interesting. I'd never had fun studying at any point in my life before, but after some thought, I realized it wasn't that different from hunting down new information about online games. And that wasn't so bad. Anyway, I wondered if my father knew that his infant son understood the things he was reading. I mean, I was cool with it, but I figured a normal kid my age would throw a temper tantrum or something. So that's just what I did. These were the 5 books in our house: Wandering the World, a reference guide to the various countries of the world and their unique characteristics, The Ecology and Weaknesses of Fitoan Monsters, which detailed the various monstrous creatures of the Fitoa region, where they lived, and how to deal with them. A Textbook of Magic, a wizard's manual of attack spells, ranging from the beginner to advanced levels. The Legend of Perugius, a fairy tale about a summoner named Perugius and his companions, who battle a demon and save the world in a classic good versus evil epic. The Three Swordsmen in the Labyrinth, a tale of action and adventure where 3 master swordsmen of different styles meet and head into the depths of the titular labyrinth. Those last 2 were essentially fantasy novels, but the other 3 made for good study. It was a textbook of magic that particularly drew my attention. As someone who came from a world without magic, the chance to read actual documentation on it was very relevant to my interests. Reading the book taught me some of the fundamentals. First, magic came in 3 types: attack magic, to do battle against others; healing magic, to treat the wounds of others; and summoning magic, to call things forth. And that was it. There seemed to be lots of other things you could do with magic, but according to the textbook, magic was something birthed and developed in battle, and therefore not used much outside of combat or hunting. Second, you needed magical power in order to use magic, meaning anyone could use magic so long as they had magical power. There were chiefly 2 ways of doing this: using one's innate magical power or drawing on the magical power imbued in an object. Either would suffice. There weren't specific examples, but I got the impression that people who did the former were like their own power generators, whereas the second type had to use batteries. In days of yore, the book said people had largely used the power within their own bodies for magic, But as research on magic progressed, things got more and more complex. Accordingly, expendable sources of magical energy were developed at an explosive rate. People with strong magical reserves had been able to make do, but those who had little power couldn't cast even basic spells, and so the old magical masters developed ways to draw power from things other than themselves and channel that into magic. Third, there were two ways of performing magic: incantation and magic circles. This didn't need too much explanation. It simply referred to reciting words or inscribing mystic patterns to cast a spell, respectively. In the old days, magic circles were the chief source of magical power, but in modern times, incantations were far more commonplace. In older times, even the shortest magical incantations took 1 or 2 minutes, not exactly something you could use in the heat of battle. But once you'd inscribed a magic circle, you could use it over and over again. Incantations started becoming the norm when one magician succeeded at greatly shortening them. The simplest such incantations were reduced to around 5 seconds, and consequently became the only way people utilized attack magic. For the more complex rituals involved in summoning magic, where greater efficiency wasn't attainable, magic circles remained the primary means. 4. The amount of magical power someone had was pretty much determined at birth. In your typical RPG, you gain more MP as you level up. But things didn't work that way in this world. Almost everyone was stuck where they were. Almost everyone, which implied that some people changed over time. I wondered which group I'd fall into. The book also said that one's level of magical power was inherited. I knew my mother was able to use healing magic, so maybe it was all right to have some expectations for myself. Still, I was uneasy. Even if my parents excelled at this sort of thing, I wasn't sure my own genes would be up to the task. For the time being, I decided to try my hand at the simplest magic I could. The textbook included both incantations and magic circle spells. Since the former was now mainstream and I had nothing to draw a magic circle with, I opted to start by studying the incantations. As I understood it, as the scope of a spell got larger, the invocations involved got longer, until you eventually needed to use a magic circle in concert. But if I was starting out with simpler things, I ought to be fine. The most proficient of wizards, the book said, could cast spells without incanting anything at all, or drastically shorten the incanting time at the very least. I wasn't sure why training allowed people to circumvent the incantation, though. After all, the amount of someone's magical power didn't change. There was no leveling up and no corresponding increase to maximum MP. Maybe with training, the amount of MP spent on the spell decreased? But spending less MP wouldn't make the process less involved, would it? Well, anyway, whatever the case, I just needed to give it a shot. With a textbook of magic in my left hand, I held out my right and began to recite the words. Let the vast and blessed waters converge where thou wilt, and issue forth a single pure stream thereof, water ball. I felt a sensation like blood pooling in my right hand, and then, as if that blood had extruded through my palm, a sphere of water about the size of my fist manifested itself. Gah! I yelped at the strange feeling, and a moment later the ball of water fell and splattered onto the floor. It looked like concentration was required in order to maintain a spell. Concentrate, concentrate. I could feel the blood welling in my hand once more. That's it. There we go. Yeah, this feels right. Once again, I held out my right hand, forming an image in my head as I recalled how things had gone the last time. I wasn't sure how much magical power I had, but I figured that I couldn't just keep using it over and over. My plan was to practice one thing at a time until I could pull it off. I would form the image in my mind and play it out over and over and try to enact it upon reality. If I tripped up, I would call that image back to mind until I had it perfectly emblazoned within my head. This was the same way I'd practiced combos in fighting games, back in my previous life. Thanks to that, I almost never screwed up a combo during a real match. Hopefully that meant my training methodology would be sound here too. I drew a deep breath. My blood coursed through my body, from my toes to the top of my head, collecting in my right hand, filling it with power. Then, I felt that power pop into being before my palm. Now, bit by bit, so very, very carefully, my thoughts fell in line with the beating of my heart. Water ball, ball of water, water, wetness, wet, wet panties. Whoops, that kinda just slipped in there. Getting back to it, then, I buckled down and set my mind to it. Water, 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 water! Ha! I cried out in pure reflex as my hand shot out before me, fingers spread. In that instant, the ball of water came into being. Whoa, what? In my moment of shock, the ball of water plopped to the floor. Wait, I hadn't shouted an invocation, had I? But then, why? All I'd done was put myself into the same mental space as the last time I'd tried the spell. Did incantation not matter much when reproducing the flow of magical power? Was using magic without chanting really that easy? That had to be a high-level skill, right? If it's that easy, what's the point of the incantation at all? Here I was, a complete beginner, and I'd successfully pulled off a spell without any words at all. I'd simply focused the magical energy of my body in the front of my mind and then willed it to take shape. That's all it was, which implied that the incantation wasn't really necessary after all. Anyone could do what I'd just done. Perhaps the incantation was an activation trigger for the spell, where uttering the words would create the effect without having to focus on the energy coursing through your body. That had to be what it was. Sort of like the difference between manual and automatic transmissions in a car, where you could still take manual control if you really wanted to. Using an incantation allows magical effects to trigger automatically. This had some huge advantages. First, it made for easy teaching, rather than needing a convoluted explanation about feeling the blood coursing through your veins converging and all that. Casting a spell by chanting words was both easier to explain and easier to understand. And then, as one's studies progressed, the idea of the incantation being an indispensable part of the process would naturally take root. The second advantage was that incantations were easy to use. Attack magic, by its very nature, was something that needed to be done in the heat of battle. It was a lot faster to rattle off a chant than it was to close your eyes and stand there humming as you tried to concentrate. Also, in the heat of the moment, it was far easier to blurt something out than it was to go through a series of minute gestures. But maybe some people do find the first option easier. I flipped through the book, but there was nothing about casting spells without incantation. That was odd. What I'd just done hadn't been all that difficult. Maybe I had some kind of special talent, but I doubted it was something that others weren't able to tap into at all, I reasoned. A magician typically used incantations from when they were a beginner to when they became a master. After casting thousands or even tens of thousands of spells, the body grew accustomed to the incanting. Even if they did try to cast a spell wordlessly, they wouldn't know how. Therefore, it wasn't something that was ordinarily done, and hence the book said nothing of it. Yeah, that does make sense. After all, I was hardly ordinary myself. That was cool, right? Sort of like having a sneaky trick up my sleeves. Did she just activate the crime catalyst without an oratorio? But that catalyst is usually just supposed to open up the channel. Oh, now I sure was interested. Okay, no getting ahead of myself. I needed to calm down and keep my cool. My past self had gotten all caught up in this feeling too, and we know how he turned out, someone who puffed himself up because he was better with computers than the average person, then got way too cocky and failed hard at life. I needed to keep a level head, restrain myself. The important thing here was not to think of myself as being better than other people. I was just a beginner. And no, I was like a novice bowler who just happened to land a strike on my first toss through dumb luck. Beginner's luck, that's all it was. I needed to buckle down and focus on studying instead of mistaking this for some sort of innate knack. All right, I had it. I first attempt a spell by chanting the incantation, then practice single-mindedly by mimicking how it felt without using the incantation. Okay, let's try this again. I held my right hand out in front of me. My arm felt vaguely heavy, and my shoulder like I had something big weighing it down. This was exhaustion. Had I been concentrating too hard? No, that couldn't be right. I was a self-styled, low-end MMO master who could go without sleep for 6 days when grinding. No way had this paltry mental exertion drained me that much. Am I out of MP then? What the heck? If someone's magical power was determined at birth, did that mean I only had enough MP to cast 2 water ball spells? That seemed way too low. Or maybe since this was my first time, I just had less magical power to work with. No, that didn't make sense. I tried once more, just to make sure, and I wound up passing out.
Honestly, Rudy, when you get tired, you need to go to the toilet first and then get to bed.
I woke to find I'd fallen asleep with the book in hand, and wet myself in the meantime. Damn it, I couldn't believe I'd wet myself at my age. That was humiliating. Damn it, how could I... Wait, I was only 2 years old, right? Wetting myself was still forgivable at that age, yeah? So, it seemed my magical power had been too low after all. That deflated my mood some. Still, even if all I could muster was 2 water balls, what mattered was how I used them, I supposed. Maybe I should concentrate on conjuring them more quickly? Ugh. The next day, I still felt fine after conjuring my 4th water ball. It was after the 5th that I started to feel tired. What the hell? Given my experience the day before, I knew that casting another would cause me to black out, so I decided to stop. And then it hit me. That put my limit at 6 water balls, twice what I'd managed yesterday. I stared into the bucket that held 5 spells worth of water and wondered why I'd been able to do twice as much as the day before. Had I been more tired because it was my first time? Had the spells consumed more MP because it was my first time casting them? I'd cast all my spells today without incantations, so I doubted it had anything to do with that. I had no idea. Perhaps my abilities would grow further the next day. The following day, my water ball count increased significantly. Now I was up to 11. What was the deal? It felt like the more I used this spell, the more I was able to use it. If I was right, I would be able to pull off 21 the next day. The day after that, just to be on the safe side, I only cast 5 before calling it a day. The day after that, though, I managed 26. It looked like I was right. Using the spell more frequently did allow me to cast it more. I'd been lied to. What was all that stuff about a person's magical reserves being set at birth? People were just assigning limitations to talent when it didn't have any. How dare adults tell children where their limits were? Guess I can't take what this book says at face value then. The stuff written in the book seemed to take the perspective that there were limits on what a person could achieve. Or maybe it was talking about how things worked after training one's skills. Perhaps the book was saying that there was an upper limit on magical power that no further amount of effort and training could get you past. No, it was still too soon to come to that conclusion. For now, that would just be a hypothesis. Maybe it was like, maybe someone's power increased as they grew or something. And using magic during childhood might rapidly cause that upper limit to increase, which meant I alone had a special quality that no. I'd already said I wouldn't consider myself special. In my former world, they said that exercising while you were growing let your abilities develop more rapidly. Conversely, after you were done growing, improvement only went so far even with intense effort. We might be talking about magic in this world, but the realities of how the human body worked couldn't be that different. The principle was still the same, which meant there was only one thing for me to do: continue honing my skills as best I could while I was still growing up. The next day, I decided that I would continue to push my magic to its limits daily, which increased how much I could use it. As I could recreate the right feeling, casting a spell without an incantation was easy enough. I hoped to master the beginner spells for each branch of magic before long. By beginner spells, I meant the most basic spells that could be used for offense. This included spells like Water Ball and Fireball, as well as other even more entry-level spells. Spells were broken up into 7 levels of difficulty: beginner, intermediate, advanced, saint, king, imperial, and divine. Typically, magicians with training could use the advanced spells from the discipline of magic they focused on, but could only use beginner intermediate spells from the other schools. Once someone was able to cast spells of a rank higher than advanced, they were acknowledged as a fire saint or water saint or whatever, depending on their chosen branch. Saint-tier magic? I kinda hope to be that good someday. My magic textbook, however, only included fire, water, wind, and earth spells up to the advanced level. Where was I ever going to learn Saint-tier magic then? No, I shouldn't dwell on that so much, I decided. In RPG Maker, if you start out by making all your strongest monsters first, odds are it's just going to be frustrating. You need to start with the low-level stuff, like slimes. Although I personally never managed to complete anything in that game, even when I did start with slimes. The beginner-level water spells listed in the tome were as follows: Water Ball hurls a spherical projectile of water. Water Shield causes a spout of water to erupt from the ground, forming a wall. Water Arrow launches a bolt of water roughly 20 centimeters long at a target. Ice Smash strikes an opponent with a mound of ice. Ice Blade creates a sword made out of ice. These were all beginner spells, but the amount of magical power they required was very different, taking somewhere roughly between twice and 20 times as much as the basic Water Ball spell. For my fundamentals, I stuck to water magic. If I tried fire magic, I might accidentally burn the house down. Speaking of fire magic, the amount of magical energy you put into a spell affected the temperature of the results, so it stood to reason that advanced ice spells worked the same way. But despite the fact that the book claimed both Water Ball and Water Arrow were supposed to fly through the air, I wasn't able to get them to do that for some reason. I wasn't sure why. Was I getting some part of the spell wrong? I couldn't really tell. A textbook of magic did say something about the size and speed of spells. Maybe after conjuring my projectile, I needed to imbue it with additional magical energy in order to control its movement.
I decided to give it a try. Huh?
I murmured as my sphere of water grew larger. Whoa! And then, splash, crap. I dropped it on the floor again. After that, I experimented with making the water ball bigger and smaller. I tried creating 2 water balls at once, then attempted to change their sizes separately. I discovered a few things, but still didn't manage to make any of my spells fly. Fire and wind spells remained floating in the air, since they weren't subject to gravity, but they fizzled out and disappeared after a while. I tried using the wind to move the hovering orbs of flame, but I got the impression something wasn't right with that. 2 months later, thanks to a mistake in my studies, I managed to get a water ball to fly. As a result, it finally became clear why incantations were a key part of the process. All incantations followed a similar process: spell genesis, size determination, speed determination, and then activation. The caster was the one who regulated those 2 intermediary steps before completing the spell.
First, the caster called forth the shape of the spell they wished to use. Next, there was a window of time where they could add additional magical power to impact its size.
Third, after the size had been determined, there was another window for the caster to adjust the spell's velocity. Finally, the caster released the finished spell from their hand. That was how it worked, or at least how I understood it. The trick was to add magical power in 2 discrete stages after the initial casting. There was an order to it. Unless you did something to adjust the spell's size, you couldn't move on to adjusting its speed. It made sense that if you tried to change the spell's speed first, you'd only make it bigger and nothing more. In that vein, when using a spell without incanting, the caster had to hold that entire process in their head. That sounded like an inconvenience, but it did shorten the time it took to infuse the spell with power to affect its shape and speed. This allowed for a spell to be cast a few seconds quicker. I was also able to tweak the process of creating the initial spell. For instance, this wasn't listed in the book, but it was possible to freeze a water ball and turn it into an ice ball, that sort of thing. If I kept up my studies, maybe I'd be able to pull off the Kaiser Phoenix. Or something like that. Lots of things could work. It all just depended on what ideas came to mind. This was starting to get fun. Still, fundamentals were important. I needed to build up my magical potential before I started experimenting. I had 2 items on my training regimen now: increasing my magical reserves and making silent spellcasting second nature. Setting goals that were too grand up front would only lead to disappointment. The trick was to start small. Okay then, it was time to buckle down and do it. Every day from that point on, I practiced my beginner tier spells until I was on the verge of passing out from exhaustion. Chapter 4. Master. I turned 3 years old. I'd recently finally learned my parents' names. My father was Paul Greyrat, my mother was Zenith Greyrat, and my name was Rudeus Greyrat, the firstborn son of the Greyrat family. My parents didn't refer to each other by their first names, and they called me Rudy for short, so it took some time to learn what all of our actual formal names were.
My Rudy really does love that book, doesn't he?
Zenith said, with a smile as I puttered about with a textbook of magic in hand, as I usually did. My parents didn't seem bothered by the way I always lugged the book around. Even when I was eating, I'd keep it tucked under my arm. I did, however, make a point never to read it in front of them. Not because I wanted to keep my talents a secret, but simply because I wasn't sure what this world's views on magic were. Back in my old world, for instance, witch hunts had been a thing you know, where they'd burn suspected magicians alive for heresy. Of course, considering that my magic textbook was something of a practical guide, magic probably wasn't considered heresy in this world, but that didn't mean people might not still take a dim view of it. Maybe magic was something you only did when you were grown. If nothing else, magicians risked blacking out if they used it too much. People might think it could stunt a child's growth. With all that in mind, I decided to keep my magical aptitude a secret from my family. As it was, I had to practice casting spells out the window, so there was a chance I'd be found out anyway. I didn't have much choice in that, though. Not if I wanted to test how quickly I could launch my spells. Our maid, whose name was Lilia, apparently, would occasionally give me stern looks, but my parents remained as blasé as ever, so I was pretty sure I was safe. If people tried to stop me, I wouldn't fight it, but I didn't want to squander my childhood while I still had it. I needed to flex my talents now, before they set and became too rigid. Now was the time for me to make the most of things. Then, one afternoon, my secret magic training came to an end. My magical reserves had grown a decent amount, so I went through the incantation for an intermediate tier spell rather casually. The water cannon, size 1, speed 0. I figured that, as usual, the water would pool into my bucket. Maybe it would flow over, but surely not by too much. So,
I cast the spell and launched forth an impressive amount of water that blasted a massive hole in the wall. I stood there, dumbstruck, watching as water dripped from the wooden edges of that hole. I was too flummoxed to think of what to do. Given the size of the hole, people would know it had been made by magical means. There was nothing I could do to change that now. I always had been quick to give up.
What happened? Whoa! What the hell? Wait, Rudy. Are you okay?
Paul was a good guy. It was obvious that I was the one who'd done this, but all he cared about was that I was all right. He went on his guard, carefully checking the surroundings.
Was there a monster? No, not around these parts.
Oh, goodness.
Zenith came into the room. She was always a lot calmer than my dad. She looked first at the shattered wall, then at the pool of water on the floor. Huh? Her gaze shot to my magic textbook and fixed on the page it was open to. My mother looked back and forth between me and the book, then crouched in front of me. She looked me in the eye, her mouth curled into a warm smile. The smile didn't reach her eyes, though. It was pretty scary. I wanted to look away, but I tried as hard as I could to keep my gaze locked with Zenith's. If I'd learned anything from my time as a jobless freeloader, it was that getting petulant and defiant when you'd done something bad only made the situation worse. So I wasn't going to take my eyes off hers, no matter what. Right now I needed to show sincerity, and the simplest way to do that was to make eye contact. At least you would look sincere, regardless of how you felt.
Rudy, did you speak some of the words from that book out loud?
I'm sorry. I replied with a tiny nod. A straightforward apology was best when you'd done something wrong. I was the only one who could have done this, so lying about it would only damage my parents' trust in me. Back in my old life, I told casual lie after casual lie until no one trusted me. I wasn't going to make that mistake again.
Sorry? That was an intermediate tier spa.
Oh, honey, did you hear that? Oh, honey, did you hear that? Oh, I just knew our boy was a genius.
She balled her hands into tiny fists and hopped around in ecstasy. Well, she sure was in a good mood. I guess that meant the apology was accepted.
Wait, hold on. We haven't even taught you how to read yet, or...
We'll have to hire a tutor for him right away. Oh, he's going to grow up to be an amazing magician. I just know it.
Zenith's reaction to my ability to use magic was one of barely contained glee. Evidently, my fears that children shouldn't use magic were unfounded. Meanwhile, Lilia had casually and wordlessly begun to clean up. Either she already knew I could use magic, or she'd had her suspicions. Since this ability didn't appear to be so bad, it seemed she hadn't cared that much. Or maybe she just wanted to see my parents happy.
Honey, let's head into Roa tomorrow and post a job for a tutor. We need to make sure Rudy can hone his talents.
Zenith was over the moon, rambling on and on about how her son was a genius for suddenly demonstrating a knack for magic. I couldn't tell whether she was just being a proud mother or if being able to use an intermediate-level spell was considered that impressive. It had to be the former, right? She hadn't seen me practicing any of my magic, so her saying that she just knew I was a genius meant she'd already decided that for herself, without any basis. No, that wasn't exactly true. She clearly had some kind of intuition. I did talk to myself a lot. Even when I was reading, I'd mutter words or phrases that I liked aloud. Ever since I came to this world, I'd been sub-vocalizing things while reading. At first, it was all in Japanese, but after picking up the local tongue, I subconsciously started using that instead. When Zenith heard me utter words, she would pipe up to explain what they meant. This was also how I learned a lot of this world's proper nouns, but that's not really relevant here. Nobody had said anything as I went about teaching myself this world's language. Nobody taught me the words I was reading either. From my parents' perspective, they were seeing their child read when he hadn't been taught as well as speaking the contents of books aloud. Of course they'd think I was a genius. I mean, if it were my kid, that's what I'd think. That's how it went in my past life. After my younger brother was born, he was faster to grow up faster and picking things up compared to me or my older brothers, including speaking and walking. My parents were the sort of easygoing folks who'd cheekily say, "Oh, I wonder if he's a genius," even when it was nothing that impressive. I had to keep in mind that, while I might have been a jobless high school dropout, I also had the mental age of a person in his mid-30s. I could do this.
Honey, we have to get him a home tutor. I'm sure we'll be able to find a great magic instructor in Ra.
Apparently, parents were the same no matter where you were. Anytime a kid shows some inkling of special talent,
It's straight to making sure they get the proper special education for their gifts. In my old life, my parents heaped praise on my younger brother for being such a genius and gave him a whole bunch of stuff to learn.
Hold up, now. Didn't you promise that if we had a boy, we'd raise him to be a knight?
So, a girl would be a magician, but a boy would be a knight? They must have agreed to that before I was born.
But he can already use intermediate magic at his age. With the right training, he'd be an amazing magician.
A promise is a promise, though.
Don't you talk to me about promises? You break promises all the time.
We're not talking about me right now.
And so my parents got into a bit of a spat, while Lilia continued calmly going about her duties. The argument dragged on for a bit until, as Lilia finished cleaning up, she said with a sigh,
What if he studies magic in the morning and practices swordplay in the afternoons?
That suggestion put the argument to rest, and my silly parents decided on their kid's studies without bothering to take his feelings into account. Well, no big deal. I did promise to give it my all in this new life after all. And so it was decided that a home tutor should be hired for me. I gathered that the position of personal instructor to a young noble was a well-paying one. Paul was one of the few knights in the area, which made him a fairly low-ranking noble himself, so I wondered whether he could offer competitive pay. We were out in the sticks on the far border of the kingdom, though, and out on the frontier, high-level talent, especially for something like a magician, was in short supply. If we put in a request to something like a Mages Guild or Adventurers Guild, would anyone even respond? My parents also seemed worried by that prospect, but they apparently found someone promptly, because my lessons were going to start the next day, and since there was no inn in our village, my teacher would be living with us. My parents were fairly certain that my teacher would be some retired adventurer. Young people wouldn't come all this way to the boonies, and there was no shortage of jobs for royal magicians back in the capital. As I understood it, in this world, only advanced-level magicians taught the arcane arts. So, whoever we got would at least be an intermediate or advanced-level adventurer, possibly higher. In my mind's eye, I pictured a middle-aged or elderly fellow with many years of diligent study under his belt, complete with the long beard that was requisite for such wizards.
I'm Roxy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
My expectations were quite off the mark. The person who showed up was a young girl, maybe of junior high age. She was clad in brown, wizardly robes, her blue hair styled into braids, her posture prim and proper. Her white skin looked untouched by the sun, and her eyes were somewhat sleepy. Her expression didn't exactly radiate sociability, and despite her lack of glasses, she looked like the sort of girl who liked to hole up in a library with her nose in a book. Title: Cast by Arteo Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. In one hand, she carried a bag, and in the other, she held a staff befitting a magician. The family came to greet her together, my mother carrying me in her arms. My parents looked her over, at a total loss for words. No wonder, really. This couldn't have been what they were expecting at all. When hiring someone to be a home tutor, you'd figure you'd get someone a bit further on in years. And instead, here was this little thing. With all video games I'd played, the idea of a magician lowly wasn't terribly unusual to me. Underage, scornful eyes, socially awkward. That right there was the trifecta. She was perfect. I wanted her to be my bride.
Oh, are you the home tutor?
Aren't you a little,
My parents were fumbling with their words, so I decided to be direct and finish my father's sentence. You're little.
Hey, you're sure one to talk.
She sure seemed to be touchy about the subject, and I wasn't even talking about her breasts.
So, where's this student of mine?
Oh, that would be our boy right here.
Zenith replied, bouncing me slightly in her arms. I gave Roxy a cheeky wink. Her eyes went wide, and she sighed once more.
Gosh, this happens sometimes. Kids show signs of growing up a little fast, and the damn parents get it into their heads that he's got a special talent.
Hey! I heard that, Roxy. I totally agreed with her, but still.
you say something?
Oh, nothing. I'm just not sure that your son would be able to understand the principles of magic.
Oh, don't you worry. Our little Rudy here is brilliant.
Yet again, Roxy sighed.
All right, then. I suppose I'll just have to do what I can.
She sounded like she'd already decided it was futile. And so, that was the first day of taking classes with Roxy in the morning.
and practicing swordplay with Paul in the afternoon.
Okay, so this magic textbook here, actually. Before we get to that, how about we see how much magic you can use, Rudy?
Roxy had taken me into the yard for our first lesson. I gathered that magic was something typically practiced outside. Heck, I'd already learned firsthand what could happen when you let loose with magic inside the house. People don't want to go around blowing holes in walls or anything.
First, I'll demonstrate. Let the vast and blessed waters converge where thou wilt, and issue forth a single pure stream thereof, water ball.
As Roxy chanted her incantation, an orb of water about the size of a basketball formed in her palm. Then she hurtled it at high speed at one of the trees in our yard. The water ball snapped the tree in half as if it were a mere twig and drenched the fence behind it. That must have been a size 3, speed 4, if I had to guess.
Well, what do you think?
My mom has always loved that tree and spends a lot of time caring for it, so I think she's going to be pretty angry.
Huh? Really?
Without a doubt. One time when Paul was swinging his sword around, he'd accidentally lopped off one of the tree's branches, but Zenith hadn't been terribly mad about it.
Oh, that's not good. I have to do something about this.
Roxy stammered, rushing over to the tree in a panic. With a grunt, she hefted the fallen trunk back into place. Then, red in the face and straining with exertion, she began to chant.
Anak. Let this divine power be a satisfying nourishment, giving one who has lost their strength the strength to rise again, healing.
Slowly and surely, the trunk of the tree worked its way back into its original position. Okay, credit where credit is due. That was pretty amazing.
Oh.
You can use healing magic too, miss.
Hmm? Oh, yes. Anything up through intermediate tier spells.
Oh, wow! That's amazing!
Oh, not at all. With the proper training, anyone could do this.
Roxy's tone was somewhat curt, but the corners of her mouth softened, and her nose wiggled proudly. Yeah, she was happy, all right. All it took was laying on some praise. Man, she was easy to please.
All right, Rudy. You give it a try.
Okay.
I held out my hand and, crap, it had been nearly a year since I'd performed water ball by using the incantation, and I couldn't remember how it went. Roxy had just said it, though. Let's see. How does it go again?
Let the vast and blessed waters converge where thou wilt, and issue forth a single pure stream thereof.
She apparently figured this was well within my capabilities. She'd said it so matter-of-factly, though, that I couldn't remember it after hearing it just the once. Let the vast and blessed waters. I began, before failing to recall the rest, so I cut the incantation short. I conjured a ball of water just a little smaller and just a little slower than Roxy had. After all, if I outdid her, she might get all pouty. Hey, I like to be nice to younger girls.
The basketball-sized water ball struck its mark with a splash, the tree creaking and cracking as it fell over. Roxy fixed her gaze on this sight, her expression stiffening.
You cut your incantation off, didn't you?
Yeah. Uh-oh, was I in trouble? That's right, the magic textbook didn't say anything about casting spells without incantations. I'd done it as if it wasn't a big deal, but maybe this was some cultural taboo. Or maybe she was angry that I'd pulled off something that should have required a lot more training. Hopefully, she'd just admonish me for being sloppy with my chanting or something.
Do you usually cut your incantations short like that?
I wasn't sure how to answer that, and after some wavering, decided to be honest. After all, I was going to be studying under her, so she'd figure it out eventually.
I usually, don't use them at all.
Not at all.
Roxy's eyes were wide with shock and disbelief as she looked down at me. She quickly regained her composure, however.
Ah, yes. Now I get it. That makes sense. Are you feeling tired right now, then?
A little, but I'm all right.
I see. Well, the size and force of your water ball was just fine.
Thank you.
Finally, Roxy cracked a smile, a real one, and then she muttered to herself,
Maybe it is worth training this kid.
Again, I can still hear you.
Okay, let's move on to the next spell.
From behind us, a scream split the air. Zenith had come outside to see how things were doing. She dropped the beverage-laden tray she'd been carrying and brought both hands to her mouth as she looked over at the mangled, toppled tree. Sadness filled her face. A moment later, that sadness was replaced with livid anger. She stomped over to Roxy, getting right in her face.
Miss Roxy, could you please not use my trees for experimentation?
Hey, Rudy's the one who did it.
If Rudy did it, it was because you let him.
The whites of Roxy's eyes grew, her body tensing as if a thunderclap had just gone off. Then she hung her head. Hey, that's what you get for trying to shift the blame onto a 3-year-old.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Please see to it that this doesn't happen again, young lady.
It won't, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
Zenith went over to the tree and restored it to its former beauty with her healing magic before heading back into the house.
Well, I sure messed this up pretty quickly.
Miss!
I'm guessing I'll be let go tomorrow.
She sat down on the ground, drawing little circles in the dirt. Wow, she really could not take even the slightest punishment, could she? I stood next to her and patted her on the shoulder, but said nothing.
Rudy?
I wasn't sure what to do after patting her on the shoulder. I hadn't really struck up a conversation with anyone in close to 20 years, so I couldn't find the words to comfort her. I honestly didn't know what the right thing to say in this sort of situation was. No, I just needed to calm down and think. What would the protagonist of an adult dating sim say to comfort someone at a time like this? Okay, I was pretty sure it would go something like this. You didn't fail here, miss.
Rudy?
You just earned some more experience, that's all.
Yes, you're right. Thank you.
Aha! So, could you please continue with our lesson? And so, right from day one, I formed a little bond with Roxy. Afternoons were spent practicing swordplay with Paul. We didn't have a wooden practice sword suitable for a toddler of my stature, so our focus was on physical training, running, push-ups, sit-ups, that sort of thing. According to Paul, getting my body used to moving was the first priority. On the days he was too busy to train with me, he told me to keep up with my fundamentals. Guess dads are like that in every world. I just had to grin and bear it. A young child doesn't have the stamina to spend an entire afternoon exercising, so we'd finish up around mid-afternoon. That being the case, I decided to spend my time between then and dinner working on spells. Adjusting the size of a spell increased the amount of magical power needed to fuel it. There was the default amount of power a spell took to cast if you put no conscious effort into it when the incantation finished, and making a spell larger than that consumed an accordingly greater amount of magical power. Sort of like the law of conservation of mass. Curiously, however, making a spell smaller also consumed more magical power. I wasn't quite sure of the principle at work there, but creating a ball of water the size of a fist took less magical energy than creating one the size of a raindrop. It was weird. I asked Roxy about that, but she just said, yeah, that's how it goes. Apparently, that hadn't been explained yet. I didn't know the mechanisms by which magic worked, but through practice, getting a handle on the methods wasn't so bad. My magical reserves had grown to the point that I wouldn't burn through them unless I cast large spells. If my goal had been simply to use up my magical power, then I could have just keep unleashing the strongest spells I had until I was drained. After a while, though, I wanted to move on to actual applications of magic, so I decided to focus on practicing more precise spellcrafting. I wanted to make my effects smaller, narrower in scope, more complex, for instance, creating sculptures out of ice, making my fingertip glow with fire to write on planks of wood, taking dirt from the backyard and separating it into its constituent components, locking and unlocking doors, and so on. Reshaping something that was already hardy and solid was obviously more difficult. Working to reshape something as hard as metal, for instance, cost more magical power. Working your magic on something smaller, on something more intricate, or attempting to work with both speed and precision at once expended vastly more power as well. The concentration and effort it took felt like trying to throw a fastball and thread the eye of a needle at the same time. I also experimented with using spells from different magical branches at the same time. This took more than 3 times the magical expenditure than using 2 spells of the same branch did. In other words, trying to be quick and precise with 2 spells of differing schools simultaneously was a great way to blow through all your magical reserves at once.
My training went on like this day after day until I reached a point where I couldn't see the bottom of where my reserves tapped out even after spending more than half the day using magic. I got the sense that I'd built them up to sufficient levels, especially for a slacker like I used to be, I thought. But I was quick to caution myself. The body goes soft when one slacks off from their physical training. For all I knew, magic could be the same. And now that I'd built up my reserves, I wanted to keep training to make sure they stayed that way. One night, while practicing some magic, I heard the lascivious sounds of a creaking bed frame and lurid moaning coming from somewhere. Well, not somewhere, really, it was coming from Paul and Zenith's bedroom, and my were the sounds vigorous. In the not-too-distant future, I might be welcoming a little brother or sister. Hopefully a sister. No more younger brothers for me? In my mind's eye, I could still see my past life's younger brother winding up for a full swing with his bat, smashing my beloved PC to bits. I didn't need a younger brother, but a kid's sister would be nice. Oh man. In my old life, I'd just stay put and bang on either the wall or the floor to shut people up whenever I was disturbed by sounds like these. Thanks to that, my older sister stopped bringing guys home entirely. Man, that brought back memories. At the same time, I'd always thought people who did that sort of thing were blights on the world. It reminded me of the people who used to bully me, sneering down at me from a position out of my reach, filling me with an anger I had no outlet for. Even if the perpetrator was somehow brought low to my level, he'd still look at me and ask, "What, you're still here?" It was the worst. But things weren't like that anymore. Maybe because I was now a child, or because it was my parents going at it, or just because I was more focused on my future, hearing them doing their business actually brightened my mood. I could tell roughly what they were getting up to just from the sounds. It seemed that Paul was pretty good in bed too. Even though Zenith was out of breath, I heard him say, "Oh, I'm just getting warmed up," before he went back to thrusting. He sounded like the main character from a pretty rapey adult dating sim. Boundless virility and all. As Paul's son, maybe I'd inherited some of that sexual prowess. And one day, I would awaken to my powers, find my heroine, and make my way into the pink. That sort of thing excited me at first, but it had recently grown stale, and I'd casually make my way down the hall to the toilet with the sounds of creaking resonating through the walls. Also, the creaking and moaning would stop as soon as I approached their room, which was pretty damn amusing. Tonight was the same. I headed for the toilet, wondering whether I should let them know that their son, now capable of walking, was there. Maybe this time I should try saying something. Maybe something like, "Muum? Dad? What are you doing naked?" It'd be fun hearing what excuses they came up with. With that in mind, I slipped out of my room as quietly as I could, except someone had already beaten me to the punch. The blue-haired girl was hunched in the dark hallway, peeking into the bedroom through the gap in the door. Her cheeks were flushed bright red, and her breathing had sunk to a low, rough panting, her gaze locked on the inside of the room. One of her hands was inside her robes, moving about rather suggestively. I quietly crept back to my own room. Roxy was in the grip of adolescence, after all, and I had the decency to pretend that I hadn't seen anything. Or, well, something like that. I definitely liked what I had seen anyway. 4 months later, I was able to cast intermediate tier spells. At that point, Roxy began to give me classroom style lessons in the evenings. That probably makes it sound sexier than it was. This was about studying, first and foremost. She was a good teacher. She was fussy about sticking to a particular curriculum, but she'd also ramp up the content of our lessons based on how well I understood things. She was good at intuitively responding to her student. She had a book that acted as a supplement to textbook, from which she'd ask me questions. If I got one right, we'd move on to the next one. And if I didn't know something, she'd very politely explain it to me. It might not sound like much, but I could feel my world opening up. In my old life, our family hired a personal tutor when my older brother was taking his entrance exams. One time, on a whim, I listened in on one of their classes, but it didn't seem like it was anything different from what was taught at school. By comparison, Roxy's lessons were much easier to understand and a lot more fun. Her teaching style resonated with me and got quick results. Of course, it didn't hurt that my teacher was a junior high-aged girl at the budding edge of sexual maturity. That was kind of an awesome situation. In my old life, I could have gotten off to that mental image in 3 pumps. Miss Roxy, how come there are only spells for things to be used in combat?
Oh, well, that's not really the case, actually. Let's see. What's the best way to explain it? Okay, first off, it's said that magic was originally created by the High Elves.
Whoa, elves. Aha! So they do exist. I could picture them with their blonde hair and greenish garb, bows strapped across their backs, tentacles keeping them all bound up. Okay, gotta calm down there. Based on the ideographic characters used to write the word for elf, it seemed they had long ears.
Miss Roxy, what are elves?
Allow me to explain. Elves are a race of people who currently live in the northern part of the Millis continent.
According to Roxy, long before even the Great Human Demon War, when the world was engulfed in the unceasing spiral of battle and chaos, the High Elves, in order to fight their enemies, entreated with the spirits of the forest to control the wind and the earth, and thus the first magic spells were born.
Wow, so there's an entire history to this and everything?
Of course there is. Modern magic takes its form from humans mimicking the spells the elves used in battle and reworking them. Humans are good at that sort of thing, after all.
We are?
Why, yes. It's nearly always humans who push for innovation. There are only combat spells because people have mostly only used magic in battle. For anything else, you can use something close at hand instead of relying on magic.
Something close at hand? What do you mean?
Well, for instance, if you need a light source, you can just use a candle or a lantern, right?
Ah, I got it. So we were in that kind of setting, where tools and devices were simpler to use than magic. That made enough sense. Granted, silent casting would be easier still.
Moreover, not all magic is used for battle. For instance, summoning magic lets you call forth powerful fiends or spirits.
Summoning magic, do you think you'd be able to teach me that soon?
I'm afraid not. I can't use it myself, but to get back to my earlier point, magical implements also exist.
Magical implements? I was pretty sure I had an idea of what she meant, but that was still a little vague. Could you explain those?
Magical implements are devices that have special magical effects. They've got a magic circle inscribed somewhere within them, so even if someone isn't a magician, they can still make use of them. Some of them utilize vast amounts of magical power, though.
Okay, so that was pretty much in line with what I'd been imagining. Still, it was too bad about Roxy not being able to use summoning magic. I understood the principles of attack magic and healing magic well enough, but I didn't know how summoning magic actually worked. But hey, I'd been introduced to some new terms I hadn't heard before. Great Human Demon War Fiends, spirits. I understood them well enough on the surface, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to ask more. Miss Roxy, what's the difference between a fiend and a monster?
Fiends and monsters aren't terribly different from one another.
She explained that monsters were the result of sudden mutations in normal animals. If they were lucky enough to grow in numbers, establish themselves as a new species, and develop intellect over the generations, they became fiends. But apparently, many creatures that possessed intelligence but still attacked humans were referred to as monsters. There were also cases of fiends growing more savage and brutal over the generations, reverting back into monsters. So, there wasn't a wholly concrete delineation between the two. In general, though, monsters attacked humans and fiends did not. So then, demons are just more evolved version of fiends?
No, demons are completely different. The name demon comes from a time long ago when the races of men and demons battled one another.
Is that the Great Human Demon War you mentioned earlier?
That's right. The first conflict happened around 7,000 years ago.
Wow, that's so long ago it's almost dizzying to think about. This world evidently had quite a long history.
Oh, it's not all that long ago. Humans and demons were still at war with one another as recently as 400 years ago. It started 7,000 years ago, and the two sides have been in conflict off and on ever since.
400 years sounded pretty long ago as is, but 7,000 years of ongoing fighting? Humans and demons must really not get along. Okay, I get it. So then, what are demons?
Well, it's a little hard to actually define.
The simplest way to put it, according to her, was that demons included whoever fought on the demon side in the most recent conflict. But this, too, had its exceptions.
I'm a demon myself, actually.
Oh, you are. I had a demon for a home tutor, which I suppose meant that there wasn't any conflict going on right now. Giving peace a chance really was the way to go, huh?
That's right. More formally put, I'm one of the Migurd, from the Bigoya region of the Demon Continent. You must have noticed your parents' surprise when they first saw me, right, Rudy?
I figured that was because you're little.
I am not little. That was clearly a sore spot with her. They were surprised by the color of my hair.
Your hair? I thought it was a very pretty shade of blue, personally.
They say that, for the demonic races, the closer our hair is to green, the more savage we tend to be. Depending on the lighting, my hair can look pretty green too.
Green, huh? Was that this world's danger color then? Roxy's hair was a striking sky blue color, and she twirled a finger in her bangs as she explained herself. Her mannerisms were adorable. Back in Japan, blue hair was the sort of thing I'd associate with punks or older women. When I saw people like that, I always thought it was unusual. But there was nothing unusual or off-putting about Roxy's blue locks. If anything, I thought her slightly sleepy-looking eyes helped complete the picture. She looked like she could be the first character whose route I'd try to complete in an adult dating sim. I think your hair is pretty.
Oh, thank you very much. But that's the sort of thing you should say to a girl you like after you've grown up.
I didn't miss my opening. I like you, miss. I couldn't help it. Hitting on cute girls is what I do.
I see. Well, in another 10 or 15 years, if your feelings haven't changed, please feel free to tell me that again.
She'd pretty cleanly rebuffed me, but I still caught the happy look that crossed her face. I wasn't sure how much the nice guy skills I'd honed by playing hentai games would help me in this world, but the answer clearly wasn't nowhere. Jokes and lines that were old and played out back in Japan might well be unique and passionate ways to win over someone's heart here. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what I was trying to get at either. The point is that Roxy was cute and naughty, and I wanted to push her buttons. The considerable age gap between us was definitely an issue, though. Maybe something to think about for the future.
To get back to the subject at hand, the idea that more brightly colored hair signifies danger is nothing but a superstition.
Oh, it is? Now I felt silly for having taken the whole danger color thing seriously.
Yes, during the war, 400 years ago, the Supered, a green-haired demonic race from the Babinos region, went on a brutal rampage. That's where the association comes from. The color of someone's hair doesn't actually have anything to do with that.
A brutal rampage, you said?
Indeed. After only a decade and change of war, they became feared by friend and foe alike. Becoming as violent as they were despised, they were so dangerous that after the war, persecution drove them almost completely from the demon continent.
Their own allies pushed them away after the war? Wow. People really hate them that much?
They do.
What did they do that was so bad?
Well, I can only tell you what I've heard. Things like attacking allied demon settlements and slaughtering the women and children, or wiping out all of their foes on the battlefield and then turning to do the same to their allies. When I was a kid, I'd hear stories like that all the time. Don't stay up too late or the super will come and eat you. That sort of thing.
It almost sounded like she was talking about the put-away man, the boogeyman from that old anime.
The Migad super peoples are closely related, and I've heard we used to get treated much the same as they were. I imagine your parents will probably tell you something like this soon enough, but if you ever see someone with emerald green hair and what looks like a red jewel set in their forehead, make sure you don't go anywhere near them. And if interacting with one is unavoidable, whatever you do, make sure you don't make them mad.
Emerald green hair and a red jewel in the forehead? She must have been describing the super to me. What'll happen if I make them mad?
You might get your entire family killed.
You said emerald green, with a red jewel in their forehead, right?
That's right. The thing on their forehead is their third eye, which allows them to see the flow of magic.
Are all the super women?
No. There are men, too, like you'd expect.
If they do something with the jewel on their head, does it turn blue or anything like that?
No. At least, not that I know of.
Well, I was happy I'd gotten to ask what I wanted. It sounds like they stand out and are pretty easy to recognize, at least.
That's right. If you ever see one, just act casual like you've got something else to do, and get out of there. If you bolt all of a sudden, you might provoke them.
Spotting some punk and making a run for it just invited the chase, huh? Yeah, I had some experience with that. So, if I do have to talk to one, just speak very politely, and I should be okay?
As long as you don't say anything blatantly degrading, then there ought to be no problem. However, There are many differences in what's commonly accepted in human culture versus demon culture, so you might not know what words will trigger an outburst. It's safest to avoid being obliquely sarcastic and that sort of thing.
These guys must have some incredible tempers. Roxy had said they'd been victims of oppression, but it sounded like these fears had some basis. I mean, if their anger was scary enough to warn other people to stay away from them, yikes. If I got killed, I doubted I'd be lucky enough to get a third shot at life. So I figured it was best to do everything I could to steer clear. These super were really bad news. Roughly another year went by. My magic lessons were proceeding apace. I could now use advanced tier spells from all different branches of magic. All without using incantations too, of course. Compared to ordinary training, advanced magic was like picking one's nose, by which I mean there were a lot of ranged attacks, and they felt pretty awkward to use. Like, what was I going to do with the ability to make it rain over a wide area? But then I remembered how, after a prolonged drought, Roxy had made it rain over the wheat fields to the great joy of the villagers. I'd been at home at the time, so this was all stuff I'd heard from Paul. Evidently, Roxy had handled multiple requests from the townsfolk and had been solving their problems. I could almost hear it now. I was tilling the soil and struck a big rock buried in the ground. Help me, Roxy-man. Just leave it to me. Whoa! What kind of magic is that? I used water magic to dampen the soil around the rock and then used it in concert with earth magic to change it into mud. Wow! That's amazing! The rock is just sinking away! Hee! I was guessing that was probably how it went. I knew you were the sort of person who liked helping people, Miss Roxy.
It's not exactly that. I'm doing this to earn money on the side.
You get paid for doing stuff like that?
Of course.
My first instinct was to write her off as greedy, but the townspeople seemed to accept her terms. They'd never had anyone who could do that sort of thing for them before, and they deeply appreciated Roxy for it. I guess this was what they called give and take. I'd been thinking about this the wrong way. The idea of helping someone out of a bind without asking for anything in return was a very Japanese one. It was normal to get compensated for that sort of thing. It just made sense. Granted, being the shut-in I was in my past life, not only did I not help anyone else out of a bad situation, I was the bad situation for the rest of my family. One day, out of the blue, I decided to ask Roxy, would it be better if I called you Master instead of just Miss?
No, probably best not to. I'm sure you'll easily surpass me soon enough.
I had enough talent to be better than Roxy. It was enough to make me blush.
After all, it'd be weird to call someone whose powers were inferior to yours Master.
I don't think it's that weird.
Well, it'd be weird for me. I'd never outlive the shame of having someone who's clearly better than me referring to me as Master.
Ah, was that what this was all about then? Are you saying that because you got stronger than your own master, Miss Roxy?
Listen, Rudy. A master is someone who says they have nothing else they can teach you, but still butts in with their advice on each and everything you do.
You wouldn't do that, though, Miss Roxy.
I might.
Even if you did, I'd be honored. Roxy always looked pretty satisfied with herself whenever she advised me on things. I probably had quite the grin on my own face when plying her with compliments.
Oh no. If I became that resentful of my own students' talents, there's no telling what I might blurt out.
Like what sort of things?
Stuff like how I'm just a filthy demon, or how you're just some country hick.
Wow, did Roxy seriously just say that to me? I felt sort of bad for her. Being discriminated against wasn't great after all. But I guess that's what you get when there's a hierarchy to your relationship with someone. I'll be fine. Just act like you're better than me.
I'm not going to act all haughty and superior just because I'm older. I'm just not comfortable having a master-pupil relationship with such an imbalance of talent.
She shot me down real quick. It looked like my bond with my master had taken a turn for the worse. In my mind, I decided that I'd still think of her as my master regardless. After all, she was a girl who still had some traces of youth and could properly teach me whatever I couldn't learn by reading. Chapter 5, Swords and Sorcery. I was now 5. We had a small party to celebrate my birthday. Birthdays weren't a yearly celebration in these lands. At ages 5, 10, and 15, it was customary for one's family to give gifts. You were considered an adult at 15, so that made a lot of sense. Paul gifted me with a pair of swords for my birthday. One was a real sword too long and heavy for a 5-year-old to wield. The other was a short practice sword.
The real sword had been properly tempered and bore a fine edge. It definitely wasn't something suitable for a little kid.
Son, a man must always carry a sword within his heart. In order to protect what's important to you...
My father started a long, rambling stream of advice, and I just smiled and nodded. His spiel had a friendly and energetic air to it, but in the end, even Zenith chided him for going on too long. Admonished, he smiled and wrapped up with,
Just remember to keep it put away when you don't need it.
The man clearly wanted me to have the self-awareness and preparation to be able to carry a sword around. Zenith gave me a book.
Because you love books so much.
It was a botanical encyclopedia. Oh, wow, I whispered instinctively. Books in this world were quite expensive. They had the means to make paper, but didn't yet have printing, so everything had to be handwritten. The encyclopedia was a thick volume, complete with helpful illustrations and easy-to-understand descriptions. I could only imagine how much it must have cost. Thank you, Mother. I wanted something just like this. With that, Zenith drew me into a tight hug. Roxy gifted me with a wand. It was a stick, roughly 30 centimeters long, set with a small red stone at the tip.
I crafted it yesterday. It completely slipped my mind, since you've been using magic this whole time. A master is supposed to create a rod or wand for a pupil who can use elementary magic. My apologies for forgetting.
As much as she didn't like being called Master, Roxy sure seemed reluctant to buck the traditions of the role.
Thank you, Master. I'll take good care of it.
Roxy grimaced. The following day, I began actually training with the sword, focusing on practice swings and fundamental forms. We had a wooden practice dummy in our yard that I used to practice my forms and my strikes. My father helped me with my footwork, my balance, and the like. It felt really good getting into the real meat and potatoes of swordplay. Knowing how to wield a sword was crucial in this world. Even the heroes who appeared in books mostly wielded swords. Some used axes or hammers, but they were in a distinct minority. No one used spears, because the despised Superds made use of tridents. It was commonly thought that the spear was a weapon of evil. When a spear appeared in a story, it was usually wielded by the wickedest of villains, the kind who would devour friend and foe alike, who would slaughter indiscriminately. Given that background, the art of the blade was far more advanced in this world than it was in my old one. A master swordsman could cleave a boulder in a single stroke, or unleash a flash of the blade to strike a distant foe. Paul had enough skill to accomplish the first one. I wanted to know the principles behind it, so he demonstrated it several times while praising and encouraging me. He probably felt pretty good having his young advanced magic-using son clapping and cheering for him. Still, no matter how many times he showed me the trick, I couldn't tell how he did it. So I asked for an explanation.
Take a step forward, like Han, and then Pfwam.
Like this?
No, you don't. That was a step forward, like... and then a wham. I said, oh. Stay Ream. I must say the possession.
And so it went. This was just conjecture on my part, but it seemed to me that in this world, magic was woven into the art of swordplay.
It was visibly different from the flashy magical effects created by spellcraft, and instead worked by improving one's physical prowess and strengthening the metal of the sword itself. How else would it be possible to move at such blinding speeds, or slice a huge rock in two?
Paul wasn't using magic consciously. That was why he couldn't explain how he did what he did. It meant that once I was able to reproduce what he did, I'd be able to use magic to give myself a physical boost. I had to stick with it. In this world, there were 3 primary schools of swordplay. First was the sword god style. This style maintained that the best defense was a good offense and focused on high-speed moves with the goal of striking one's opponent first, ideally finishing the fight with a single blow. If the opponent was still standing, the practitioner would continue to strike and feint back until they were victorious. If I had to compare it to something from my old world, the closest thing would be Satsuma-ji in Ryu. Second was the water god style, the polar opposite of sword god. It was a defensive form, focused on warding off strikes and then counter it. Its core tenet was one of non-aggressive defense.
which didn't allow the practitioner many openings for attack. But a true master would be able to unleash a counterstrike to any attack coming their way, and I do mean any attack, including projectiles and magical attacks. Given its focus on protection, this was the sword style of choice for royal guards and nobles.
Last was the North God style. This was less a sword form than a general battle strategy.
It didn't focus on specific moves, but allowed the user to adapt to different situations on the fly. According to Paul, this ad hoc approach involved a lot of cheap tricks and clever ploys, but mastering the style yielded truly fantastical results. The image I got was of a sword-wielding version of Jackie Chan, because this style taught one to treat injuries and allowed for fighting even with imperfect posture. It was the favored school for mercenaries and adventurers. Together, these were known as the three great styles, and each had adherents the world over. It was said that a swordsman who wanted to push their skill to the ultimate limit would knock on the door of each school and continue training until they were dead, though few people actually did this. The quick way to attain martial strength was to pick one of these styles to train in until proficient. In reality, while Paul chiefly practiced sword god style, there was a smattering of water god and north god elements included in there. It seemed that most people didn't head out into the world deciding to exclusively adhere to one style or another.
As with magic, swordsmanship was broken into the following levels of skill: beginner, intermediate, advanced, saint king, imperial, and divine. The god part of each style's name came from the epithets given to the founders of its school. The first swordsman of the water god school, for example, was able to use divine-level water spells.
Having a divine rank in both sword expertise and magical competence made for an obscenely powerful warrior. Also, it was typical when referring to swordsmen to address them as water god or water saint or whatever their level of proficiency was. For magicians, it was tradition to add level to that descriptor. Roxy, for example, was a water saint tier magician.
Paul decided that I would learn both the sword god style and water god style, the former to get a good handle on offense and the latter for defense.
But father, based on what you've told me, it sounds like North God style is the most balanced of the three.
Don't be ridiculous. It's not even a style, it's just using a sword to fight with, really.
Oh, I see. North god style was clearly the odd one out of the three great styles. Either that, or Paul just wasn't fond of it personally, though he was rather good at the style for someone who didn't like it.
You've got a knack for magic, Rudy, but it doesn't hurt to learn the sword as well. You want to be a magician who can fend off an attack from someone who can use sword god style.
So you're saying I'd be like a mage knight?
No. A mage knight is a swordsman who can also use magic.
I wasn't sure what the difference was, really. Whether you started as a warrior who picked up magic or as a magician who did it the other way round, a mage knight still knew how to use both, right? At any rate, if I worked on my swordplay, I could adapt it to my use of magic. The issue was that Paul couldn't teach me how to magically boost my physical prowess because he wasn't consciously aware of how he did it. I either needed to acquire the ability myself or attain it via the right physical training. I needed to figure out the principle at work. For a moment, Paul was lost in thought, an uneasy expression on his face.
You don't like swordplay, do you?
Was he saying that just because I had an aptitude for magic? He must have been worried that I didn't want to train in the sword. Don't get me wrong. I had no problem practicing how to use a sword. I just preferred time alone with Roxy studying magic over getting dirty and sweaty with another guy in the yard. I was an indoors sort of guy. But hey, personal preferences couldn't get in the way of things. I decided to put my best effort into my second shot at life, and that meant trying my best at magic and the sword alike.
No, I want to be as good at swordplay as I am at magic.
Paul flushed with pride and nodded happily as he brought his wooden practice sword to bear.
All right, then. Let's get to it. Come at me.
He was a simple man, swords and sorcery. I wasn't sure which I'd ultimately come to rely on. Honestly, I'd be cool with it either way, but it was also my duty to establish a good bond with my parents while I was young. All right, father. In my past life, I'd been a burden to my parents till the day they died. If I'd been nicer to them, maybe my siblings wouldn't have kicked me out of the house. I needed to be better to my parents this time around. While I was taking my first steps in sword training, my magical studies were taking on a more technical and practical bent.
What would happen if you cast Waterfall, Heat Island, and icicle field in that order?
You'd create mist.
Correct. And how would you go about clearing up that mist?
Cast Heat Island again and heat up the ground?
Exactly. Now, please demonstrate, if you would.
By using spells from different schools in succession, it was possible to create other phenomena. This was known as combined magic. A textbook of magic included a spell for making rain, but had nothing about creating mist. Therefore, magicians had to use spells from multiple schools in sequence. This allowed for the reproduction of various natural phenomena. This was a world without microscopes. They probably hadn't discovered all of the principles that governed the natural world. Combined magic contained all the creative genius of the great wizards of old. Well, I didn't need to bother with that kind of nonsense. If I wanted to create a cloud, I'd just use a spell that made rainfall and cast it as close to the ground as possible. The idea of intentionally creating a natural phenomenon was simple enough to understand. With a little outside-the-box thinking, you could do all sorts of things. For me, personally, that was a bit easier said than done. Magic can do anything, right?
It can't do anything. You mustn't rely on it too much. Just keep a cool, level head and hone your abilities to do what you're able, and what you should. Moreover, if you go around proclaiming how you can do anything, you're going to get hit with something you can't.
Despite her words, my head was filled with images of things like railguns and active camouflage. Are you speaking from experience, Miss Roxy?
I am, yes.
Well, this was a lesson I needed to take to heart then. I didn't want problems I couldn't deal with getting dropped in my lap. Do magicians get hit with a lot of problems in their line of work?
Oh, yes. There aren't that many users of advanced magic around, after all.
They said that maybe only 1 in 20 people could learn to fight, and to find a magician among them had the same 20-to-1 odds. So 400-to-1 odds of finding a capable magician, then. Magicians themselves weren't particularly rare, though.
Only 1 in 100 magicians are able to properly learn the art and graduate from magic school, becoming advanced tier magicians.
That meant that advanced tier magicians were a 1 in 40,000 deal. If we included beginner and intermediate spells in the mix, the number of things combined magic could do increased dramatically, which in turn made it so popular. To be a magic tutor around these parts, one needed to be at the advanced tier or higher. Steep requirements, but they yielded powerful results. So, there are magic schools?
Yes, there are magic schools all over the place in the major kingdoms.
I'd assumed as much, but still magic school? Huh. Should I give that a try? Move on to my schoolboy arc?
Though the largest is the Renoa University of Magic.
Whoa! They even had universities for that sort of thing? Is this university different from the other magic schools?
They have excellent facilities and a faculty to match. You'd have access to more modern and advanced courses there than at other schools, I'd imagine.
Did you go to the University of Magic too, Miss Roxy?
I did. Magic schools have very strict rules and regulations, so the University of Magic was the only school I could get into.
It sounded like these other Reno and magic schools would allow a child of noble birth like myself to attend, but could deny entry on the basis of someone not being human. Discrimination against demons was lessening in modern days, but strong prejudices still lingered.
The Renoa University of Magic doesn't lean on any strange regulations or misplaced pride. As long as you adhere to proper theory, they won't kick you out for being on the eccentric side, and they accept students of all different races. The different races even carry out individual research on their own particular kind of spellcraft. If you're interested in taking your magical education further, Rudy, I can highly recommend the University of Magic.
Way to talk up her own alma mater. I was getting ahead of myself anyway. If I enrolled in university at age 5, I'd probably get the crap bullied out of me. I think it's a little early to make that sort of decision.
Indeed. You could also fulfill Sir Paul's hopes of you becoming a swordsman or a knight. And there are people who've attained the title of knight who have also attended the University of Magic. Don't think your choice is an exclusive one between swords or sorcery. You could always become a mage knight or something after all.
Okay. Well then, it sounded like Roxy felt the opposite of Paul, worried that I didn't like magic enough. Lately, my magical reserves had been increasing, and I'd come to understand much of the theory behind the art. As a result, I was frequently restless and distracted during our classes. And besides, I'd been forced to take classes starting at age 3. She probably figured I'd grown sick of it over the last 2 years. Paul saw in me a talent for magic. Roxy saw in me a passion for the sword. With these differing ideas, they were pointing me toward a middle path. We're talking about stuff well into the future, right?
For you, Rudy, yes. Pretty soon, however, I'll run out of things I can teach you. Your graduation is coming up very soon, so this sort of conversation isn't too premature.
Wait, graduation? Chapter 6, Reasons for Respect. I had not left home since I'd come to this world. After a point, that became intentional on my part. I was afraid. When I stepped into the yard and looked at the world beyond, memories came flooding back to me. Memories of that day. The ache in my side, the chill of the rain, regret, despair, the pain of being hit by that truck. It was as vivid as if it had been yesterday. My legs trembled. I was able to look out the window. I was able to step into our yard, but I could not bring myself to go farther, and I knew why. This serene pastoral landscape that stretched out before me could turn into hell in an instant. As peaceful as the scenery looked, it would never accept me. In my past life, while sitting around the house, frustrated and horny, I'd fantasize about Japan suddenly getting caught up in a war, and then a hot girl showing up one day, needing a place to stay. I knew that if that happened, I'd rise to the challenge. That fantasy was my escape from reality. I'd dreamt it so many times. In those dreams, I wasn't larger than life or anything. Just a normal guy. Just a normal guy doing normal things, living a normal life for himself. But then, I'd wake up from that dream. I feared that if I took one step away from my home now, I'd wake up from this dream too. I'd wake up and find myself right back in that moment of crushing despair, battered by the waves of my many regrets. No, this was no dream. It felt far too real. Maybe if you told me it was a VRMMORPG, but no, this is reality, I told myself. I knew it was. Reality, and not a dream. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to take that one step away from home. No matter how I tried to reassure myself, no matter how much I promised myself aloud, my body would not obey. I wanted to cry. The graduation ceremony was to take place outside the village, Roxy informed me. Outside?
Yes, just outside the village. I've already got the horse prepared.
Can't we do it inside the house?
No, we can't.
We can't, huh? I was at a loss. Intellectually, I knew that someday I'd need to venture into the world beyond. My body refused to comply, though. It still remembered too much from before. It remembered my old life. Getting beaten up by punks, being laughed at uproariously, experiencing tremendous heartbreak, having no choice but to become a shut-in.
Why, what's the matter?
Well, it's just... There might be monsters or something out there.
Oh, we certainly won't run into any of them around these parts, long as we don't get too close to the forests. Even if we do, they'll be weak enough that I can take care of them. Heck, you could probably handle them yourself. Ah, that's right. I remember hearing that you've never left home. Have you, Rudy?
No.
Is it because you're afraid of the horse?
No, I'm not that scared of horses. I actually liked horses, really. I'd played Derby Stallion and everything.
So that's all it is. I guess you do act your age sometimes.
She totally had the wrong idea, but I couldn't tell her I was afraid of leaving the house. That'd be even more humiliating than saying I was afraid of horses. And I still had my sense of pride, my minuscule, out of touch with reality sense of pride. Really, all I wanted was to not have a little girl like her make fun of me.
I still didn't move.
Guess I don't have any other choice then. Hi up.
With that, she picked me up and slung me right over her shoulder.
Once you get on the horse, your fears will all go away. I promise.
I didn't struggle. Part of me was conflicted about what was happening, but another part of me felt like I should just accept being bodily whisked away. Roxy hoisted me atop the horse and clambered up behind me. She took the reins, tugged at them, and the horse cantered off, leaving the house behind. This was the first time I'd gone farther than my own yard. Roxy slowly guided us through the village. From time to time, villagers would shoot sharp, unabashed stares in my direction. Oh, please, no. Those looks were as scary as ever, especially that glint of sneering superiority I knew too well. Surely, they wouldn't come up and address me with a snide, condescending tone, right? They didn't even know me. How could they? The only people who knew me in this entire world were the ones in that tiny little house. So why were they looking at me? Quit staring at me, I grumbled inwardly. Get back to work.
But no, it wasn't me they were staring at.
It was Roxy, and some of the townsfolk I noticed were bowing to her. And then it hit me. Roxy had made a name for herself in the village, even with the sizable prejudice against demons in this kingdom. And we were out in the countryside, so those attitudes were even more pronounced. In the span of 2 years, Roxy had become someone that people here were willing to bow to. With that realization, I sensed the trustworthy presence Roxy had become. She knew the way, and clearly knew the people we were passing by. If anyone did try saying something to me, I was sure she'd step in. Man, how did the girl who spied on my parents' bedroom antics manage to become someone of such high esteem? The tension ebbed from my body at that thought.
Caravaggio's in a good mood. He seems happy to have you riding him, Rudy.
Caravaggio was the horse's name. I had no idea how to read a horse's mood, though. Oh, okay. I said vaguely, resting against Roxy, her modest chest pressing against the back of my head. It felt nice. Just what had I been so afraid of? Why would anyone in this quiet village want to mock me for anything?
Are you still afraid?
I shook my head. The looks from the villagers no longer frightened me at all. No, I'm okay.
See? What did I tell you?
Now that I'd found some composure, I could fully take in of my surroundings. Fields spread out as far as I could see, with houses dotted here and there. It definitely had the feel of a farming village. Much farther in the distance were quite a few more houses. If they'd been more closely packed together, I'd think it was a town. All it needed was a windmill for it to look like Switzerland or something. Actually, didn't they have watermills too? Now that I'd relaxed, I noticed how quiet things were. Things were never this quiet when Roxy and I were together. But then, we'd never really been alone like this together either. The silence wasn't bad, really. It was just a tad awkward. So, I decided to break it. Miss Roxy, what do they harvest from these fields?
It's mostly Aceron wheat, which is used to make bread. Probably some Vataris flowers and some vegetables as well. In the capital, Vataris flowers are processed into perfume. The rest is the sort of stuff you're used to seeing on your table at meals.
Oh yeah, I see some peppers. You can't eat those, can you, Miss Roxy?
It's not that I can't eat them. I'm just not terribly fond of them.
I continued asking questions like that. Today, Roxy said, would be my final exam, which would mean the end of her role as my tutor. And knowing how impatient Roxy could be, she might leave my home as early as tomorrow. If that was the case, today was our last chance to spend time together. I figured I should talk to her while I still could. Sadly, I couldn't find the right topic of conversation, so I ended up just asking more questions about my village. According to Roxy, we lived in Buena Village, which was located in the Fitoa region, in the northeastern part of the Asura Kingdom. At present, there were over 30 households here, working the farmland. My father, Paul, was a knight who had been deployed to the village. His job was to watch over the townsfolk to ensure they were carrying out their work properly, adjudicate any disputes, and protect the village from monster attacks. In short, he was basically a publicly sanctioned bodyguard. That being said, the young men in the village also took turns guarding it, so Paul spent most of his afternoons at home after he made his morning rounds. Ours was a pretty peaceful village, leaving him with little work to do. As Roxy filled me in on these details, the wheat fields grew scant. I stopped asking her questions, and the silence resumed for a while. The rest of our journey would take roughly another hour. Soon, the fields of wheat were completely gone, leaving us to travel through empty grassland. We continued our way across the plains, bound for the flat horizon. No, I could faintly see mountains in the distance. If nothing else, this was something you couldn't see in Japan. It reminded me of a picture of the Mongolian steppes in a geography textbook or something.
Right here should do nicely.
Roxy brought the horse to a stop next to a solitary tree. She dismounted and tied the reins to the tree. Then, she picked me up and helped me down, putting us face to face.
I'm going to cast the Water Saint Tier attack spell Cumulonimbus. It creates thunder and causes torrential rain to come down in a large area.
All right.
Please follow what I do and attempt to cast the spell yourself.
I was going to be using Water Saint Tier magic. Now I got it. This was my final examination. Roxy was going to use the most powerful spell she had in her repertoire, and if I was able to use it as well, that would mean she'd taught me all she could.
For demonstration purposes, I'm going to dismiss the spell after a minute. If you can keep the rain falling for at least 1 hour, let's say, I'll consider that a pass.
Did we come out here where there aren't any people because this involves secret teachings?
No, we came here because the spell might hurt people or cause damage to the crops.
Wow. Rain so powerful it could damage crops? This sounded incredible.
Now then. Oh, spirits of the magnificent waters, I beseech the Prince of Thunder. Grant me my wish, bless me with thy savagery, and reveal to this insignificant servant a glimpse of thy power. Let fear strike the heart of man as thy divine hammer strikes its anvil and cover the land with water. Come, O rain, and wash everything away in thy flood of destruction, cumulonimbus.
She chanted steadily, slowly, and purposefully. It took her just over a minute to complete her incantation. A moment later, our surroundings grew dark. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then, a pelting rain began to fall. A terrific wind roared, accompanied by black clouds that flickered with lightning. Amidst the pouring sheets of rain, the sky began to rumble, and purple light shot through the clouds. With each new flash, the lightning increased in power. It was almost as if the light itself was taking on a palpable weight, growing with a swell and ready to come right dash down. The lightning struck the tree next to us. My eardrums rang, and my vision went painfully white. Roxy let out a yelp of alarm at the near miss. A mere moment later, the clouds scattered, the rain and thunder promptly letting up.
Oh no.
Roxy muttered as she rushed over to the tree, her face pale. When my vision returned, I saw that the horse had collapsed, smoke rising from its body. Roxy set her hands on the horse's body and quickly began to chant.
Oh, goddess of motherly affection, close up this one's wounds and restore the vigor to his body X. Healing.
Roxy's chant had been flustered, but before long the horse came to. It couldn't have been that close to death, then. An intermediate tier healing spell like that couldn't restore the dead to life. The horse looked alarmed, and sweat had beaded on Roxy's forehead.
Whew. That was a close one.
Yeah, I'd say it was a close one, all right. That was my family's only horse. Paul dutifully tended to it every day, and would occasionally take it out on long rides, a bright smile on his face. It didn't have a particularly impressive pedigree or anything, but Paul and that horse had been through a lot over the years. It wasn't a stretch to say that. After Zenith, Paul loved that horse more than anything. That's how important it was. Of course, having spent the last 2 years living with us, Roxy was well aware of that too. I'd seen her more than once, looking entranced as she spied on Paul and the horse, only to then shrink away.
Could we please keep this a secret?
She was a klutz. Near misses and scrapes like this were a common occurrence with her. Still, she gave things her all. I knew she stayed up late every night to plan lessons for me, and I knew that she tried her hardest to put on an air of dignity so people wouldn't write her off for her age. I liked that about her. If it weren't for our age difference, I'd want to marry her. You don't need to worry. I won't tell my father.
Please don't.
I mean, I would have liked to be within at least a decade of her, age-wise. Despite being on the edge of tears, Roxy quickly shook her head, slapped her own cheeks, and regained her composure.
All right, Rudy. Go ahead and give it a try. I'll be sure to keep Caravaggio safe.
The horse still looked frightened, ready to bolt at any moment, but Roxy stepped in front of him, blocking his path with her tiny body. She certainly couldn't physically overpower a horse, but bit by bit, the nervous creature grew more docile. Roxy held her position and muttered an incantation under her breath. Both of them were engulfed by a wall of earth, which proceeded to grow into an earthen dome not unlike an igloo. This was the advanced tier earth spell Earth Fortress. That ought to suffice to keep them safe from the thunderstorm. All right. It was my time to do this. I was going to be so amazing that it'd blow Roxy's mind. How did the incantation go again? Ah, yes. Oh, spirits of the magnificent waters, I beseech the Prince of Thunder. Grant me my wish, bless me with thy savagery, and reveal to this insignificant servant a glimpse of thy power. Let fear strike the heart of man as thy divine hammer strikes its anvil and cover the land with water. Come, O rain, and wash everything away in thy flood of destruction, cumulonimbus. I got the words out in a single breath, and the clouds began to billow and swell. Now I understood the nature of the cumulonimbus spell. In addition to conjuring clouds overhead, you simultaneously had to handle a complex series of motions to turn them into thunderclouds or something to that effect. You had to continually funnel magic into the spell, or the clouds would stop moving and dissipate. Leaving the magic aside, it was going to suck having to stand here with both hands raised for over an hour. Wait, no, hold on. Magicians were creative. They wouldn't need to hold a pose like this for an hour to pull things off. I had to remember, this was a test. I wasn't supposed to stand still for an hour. After creating the clouds, I needed to use some form of combined magic to keep the spell maintained. This was the moment of truth. I needed to call upon all I'd learned. Okay, I think I remember seeing this on TV once. So, when clouds are still in the process of forming, some of the clouds Roxy had created earlier still lingered. If I remembered right, I could conjure a horizontal whirlwind of air and warm the air beneath it to create an updraft. And then, if I cooled the air above the updraft, it would pick up speed and... In doing all that, I wound up burning through half my magical reserves. I'd done what I could, though. Now I just had to see if it would last an hour. Satisfied, I headed back to the dome Roxy had created, rain pouring down on me as thunder rumbled in the skies above. Roxy sat against one side of the dome, the horse's reins clutched in her hands. Upon seeing me, she gave a little nod.
This dome will disappear in about an hour, so we'll be fine, assuming it doesn't go away before then.
Okay.
Don't worry. Caravaggio will be fine.
Okay.
Well, if everything's okay, then get back out there. You need to control those thunderclouds for an hour, remember.
Huh? Control them?
Well, yes. What's so strange about that?
Just, I need to control them?
Of course. This is a Water Saint tier magic spell, and if you don't keep your spell fueled with magic, your clouds are going to dissipate.
But I already took steps to make sure they wouldn't.
Huh? Oh.
Roxy began rushing out of the dome as if she'd suddenly realized something. At this, the dome began to crumble. Hey now, remember to control your magic or you'll bury the horse alive.
Whoops.
Roxy hurriedly regained control of her spell, then stepped outside. She looked into the sky, astonished.
I see. You created a diagonal whirlwind in order to push the clouds up.
The cumulonimbus clouds I'd created were still growing, seemingly without limit. Not bad, if I said so myself. A long time ago, I'd caught some TV special that went into the science behind supercell formation. I didn't remember the exact details, but I'd retained a vague visual impression of the process. Going off that, I'd managed to create something similar enough.
Rudy, you pass.
Huh? But it hasn't been an hour yet.
There's no need. If you can do that, you're more than competent enough. Now then, can you make it go away?
Sure. It'll take a little while, though. I cooled the ground over a wide area, then warmed the air above in order to create a downward current, ultimately using some wind magic to scatter the clouds. Once I was done, Roxy and I stood there, the two of us drenched to the bone.
Congratulations. Congratulations. You are now a water saint.
She looked stunning, her hand brushing aside her wet bangs, an all-too-rare grin on her face. I hadn't achieved anything in my past life, but I'd done something now. As soon as I realized that, a curious sensation welled up from within me, and I knew what it was, a sense of accomplishment. For the first time since coming to this world, I felt like I'd truly taken my first step. Following day, Roxy stood in the entryway to our house in her traveling gear, a spitting image of the person who had arrived 2 years prior. My mother and father didn't look much different either. About the only thing that had changed was that I was taller.
Roxy, you're more than welcome to stay. I still have plenty of recipes that I could teach you.
Right. Your role as a home tutor may have come to an end, but we're in your debt for your help with the drought last year. I'm sure the villagers would be happy to have you stick around.
Here were my parents, trying to keep Roxy from leaving. Unbeknownst to me, they'd apparently become good friends, which made sense. Her afternoons had been a huge swath of free time, and I guess she'd spent it broadening her social circle. She wasn't just a love interest in a video game whose circumstances only changed when the main character did something.
I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid I can't accept. Teaching your son has made me realize how powerless I truly am, so I'm going to head out and travel the world for a while to hone my magic.
She had to be a little shocked that I'd reached the same rank as her, and she'd said previously that having a pupil who exceeded her skills made her uncomfortable.
I see. I suppose it is what it is. I'm sorry that our son caused you to lose confidence in yourself.
Hey! You didn't have to put it like that, Dad.
Oh, no. I'm grateful to be shown how conceited I've been.
I'd hardly call you conceited when you're able to use Water Saint Tier magic.
Even if I couldn't, your son's ingenuity has shown me that I can be capable of even stronger magic. Rudy, I wanted to do my best for you, but I didn't have what it takes to teach you.
That isn't true. You taught me all sorts of things, Miss Roxy.
I'm happy to hear that. Oh, and that reminds me.
She reached into the folds of her robe, fumbled around, and pulled out a pendant strung with a leather cord. It was made of a metal that shone with a green luster, fashioned in the shape of 3 interlocking spears.
This is to commemorate your graduation. I didn't have much time to prepare it, but hopefully this will suffice.
What is it?
It's a Meagard amulet. If you happen to run into any demons who give you a hard time, show them this and mention my name, and they should ease up on you a bit, probably.
I'll be sure to take good care of it.
Remember, it's not a guarantee. Don't be overconfident.
Then, at the very, very end, Roxy flashed a little smile and departed. Before I knew it, I was crying. She really had given me so much wisdom, experience, technique. If I'd never met her, I'd probably still be doing what I was before, fumbling my way through with a textbook of magic in one hand. More than anything, though, she took me outside. She took me outside. That was it. Such a simple thing. It was Roxy who'd done that for me. And that meant something. Roxy, who'd come to this village not even 2 years ago. Roxy, who looked like someone who'd never get along well with strangers. Roxy, a demon whom the villagers should have considered beneath their notice. Not Paul, not Zenith. Roxy was the one who took me to the outside world, and that meant something. I say that she took me to the outside world when really all she did was take me across town. Still, the prospect of leaving home had definitely been a traumatic one for me, and she'd cured me of that just by taking me through the village. That had been enough to lift my spirits. She hadn't been trying to rehabilitate me, but I'd still had a breakthrough because of her. Yesterday, after we'd gotten back home, soaking wet, I'd turned to look at the front gate and taken just one step beyond it. And right there was the ground, just the ground, and nothing more. My anxieties had left me. Now I was capable of walking outside on my own. She'd managed to do something for me that no one else ever had, not even my parents or siblings from my past life. She was the one who'd done it for me. I'd been given not irresponsible words, but a responsible sense of courage. That hadn't been her aim. I knew that. She'd done it for herself, and I knew that too. But I respected her. Young as she was, I respected her. I promised myself I wouldn't look away until Roxy disappeared from view. In my hands, I clutched the wand and the pendant she'd given me. I still had all the things she taught me. Then I realized, up in my room, I still had a pair of her used panties that I'd stolen a few months ago. Sorry about that, Roxy. Chapter 7, Friends. I decided to try going outside. After all, Roxy had shown me I could do that, and I wasn't going to let that go to waste. Father, can I go and play outside? Children my age were prone to wandering as soon as you took your eyes off of them. Even if I stayed in the general neighborhood, I didn't want to worry my parents by slipping away without saying anything.
Play outside? Not just out in the yard, I take it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, sure. Of course you can. Come to think of it, we haven't given you much free time. Here we are, taking up all your time teaching you swordplay and spellcraft. But it's important for children to play too.
I really appreciate that I've got such good teachers.
I thought of Paul as a strict father who was worried too much about his kids' education, but his line of thinking was actually pretty flexible. I'd half expected him to demand I spend all day working on my swordsmanship. It was almost a letdown.
But, you really want to go out? Used to think you were such a frail boy. But I guess time does fly, huh?
You thought I was frail? This was news to me. I hadn't ever been sick or anything.
Because of how you never used to cry.
Oh! All right. But if I'm all right now, then it's no problem, yeah? I've grown up to be a healthy and charming boy, see? I pulled my cheeks and made a funny face. Paul frowned.
It's the ways in which you aren't childish that worry me more.
Am I not turning out to be the firstborn son you wanted me to be?
No, it's not that.
Given the look of disappointment on your face, would it be better to say that you're hoping I become a more fitting heir to the Greyrat family?
I'm not proud of it, but when I was your age, your old man was a total brat who was always going around chasing skirts.
You were a skirt chaser? So, they had those in this world too, huh? And wait, did he just call himself a brat?
If you really want to be worthy of the Greyrat family, go out there and bring home a girlfriend.
Wait, was that the kind of family we were? Wasn't my dad a knight charged with protecting a frontier town in addition to being a low-ranking noble? Did we have no social standing at all? No, I guess we were just really low-ranking.
Understood. Then I'll be heading off into the village to look for a skirt or two to chase after.
Hey now. You need to be nice to girls. And don't go around bragging just because you can use powerful magic. Real men don't get strong just to brag about it.
That was actually good advice. Man, I wish my brothers from my past life could have heard that. But Paul was right. Power wielded for its own sake was meaningless, and even I was able to understand that given the terms he'd put it in.
I understand, Father. Power should be reserved for when you can make girls see how cool you look.
That's, not exactly what I meant.
It's not? Wasn't that where this discussion was going? Whoops.
I'm just joking. It's for protecting the weak, right?
Yes, exactly.
With that conversation concluded, I tucked my botanical encyclopedia back under one arm, slung the wand I'd received from Roxy at my hip, and headed out. Before I got far, though, I stopped and turned, remembering one last thing.
Oh, by the way, Father, I think I'll probably go out like this on occasion. But I promise I'll always tell someone at home first, and I won't neglect my daily magic and sword studies either. And I promise to be home before the sun goes down and it gets dark, and I won't go anywhere dangerous.
I wanted to leave him with some reassurance. After all, yeah, sure. For some reason, Paul sounded a little out of it. Look, if you're giving me permission, just say so. Okay then, I'm off.
Come back safe.
And then I left home. Several days went by. I wasn't afraid of the outside world anymore. Things were going pretty well. I was even able to exchange greetings with passers-by without mumbling my way through. People knew about me, that I was the son of Paul and Zenith, and Roxy's disciple. When I ran into people for the first time, I'd greet them properly and introduce myself. People I was meeting again got a good day. Everyone greeted me back, bright smiles on their faces. It had been a long time since I'd felt so open and carefree. Paul and Roxy's combined relative fame was more than half of what helped me feel so comfortable. The rest was all thanks to what Roxy had done for me, which meant I guess that Roxy was to thank for the bulk of it. I'd have to take very good care of those treasured panties. My main goal in going outside was to go exploring on my own 2 feet and get the lay of the land. If I knew my way around, then I wouldn't get lost if I ever got kicked out of my house. At the same time, I also wanted to carry out some botanical investigations. I had my encyclopedia after all, so I wanted to make sure I could tell which plants were edible and which weren't, which could be used as medicine and which were poisonous. That way, if I ever got kicked out of my house, I wouldn't need to worry about where I'd get food from. Roxy had only taught me the basics, but by my understanding, our village grew wheat, vegetables, and the fragrant ingredients of perfumes. The vatterus flower, used in those perfumes, was very similar to lavender, pale purple and edible. With a visually striking specimen like that as my test case, I started using the botanical encyclopedia to cross-reference whichever plants caught my eye. Cast by Artel Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. As it turned out, however, the village wasn't very large, and we didn't have particularly notable flora. After a few days of basically nothing, I expanded my search radius and made my way closer to the forest. There were a lot more plants there, after all. If I remember right, magic builds up more readily in forests, which makes them more dangerous. More dangerous because higher concentrations of magic meant a higher likelihood of monsters coming into being, the energies causing sudden mutations in otherwise benign creatures. What I didn't know was why magic accumulated more easily there. In addition to monsters being fairly rare in these parts, we also had regular monster hunts, making things even safer. A monster hunt was exactly what it sounded like. Once a month, a group of young men, made up of knights, hunters, and the local militia, would head into the woods and clear some monsters out.
Apparently, though, monsters that were quite dreadful could suddenly turn up in the depths of the forest. Maybe part of why I'd learned magic was to do battle against such things.
But I was a former shut-in who couldn't even handle schoolyard scuffles. I couldn't afford to be arrogant. I had no actual combat experience, and if I screwed up in the heat of the moment, it'd be a total disaster. I'd seen far too many people get killed doing that sort of thing. Well, in manga anyway. But I wasn't the hot-blooded type. As far as I was concerned, combat was something to be avoided as best as possible. If I ran into a monster, I'd run back home and let Paul know. Yeah, that was a good plan. With that in mind, I made my way up a small hill. At the top stood a lone tree, the largest one around. A high vantage point like this would be perfect for confirming the layout of my village. Also, this being the biggest tree in the area, I wanted to see what type it was. And that's when I heard them. Voices.
We don't need no demons in our village.
At the sound of that voice, painful memories came flooding back. I remembered my time in high school and what had led to my becoming a shut-in. I remembered the nightmares about being called Pencil Dick. These voices reminded me so very much of the voices that had called me by that terrible nickname. These were the voices of someone who used the numbers on their side to torment somebody beneath them.
Get the hell out of here. Take this. Huh. Nice. Direct hit, man.
I saw a field, muddy from the other day's rain. 3 boys with their bodies all caked in mud were hurling mud at another boy who was walking along.
10 points if you can nail him in the head. I got him. Did you see that? Right in the head?
Yikes. This was not good.
This was classic bullying right here. These kids thought this other boy wasn't good enough for them, so they could do whatever the hell they wanted. If they'd gotten their hands on an air gun, they would have turned it on this kid and opened fire. The directions always said not to point those things at people and shoot, but boys like these didn't see their targets as people. They were abhorrent. Their target could have quickly shuffled on his way, but for some reason, he was dawdling. I looked more closely and saw that he had something like a basket clutched to his chest, which he hunched over to keep its contents safe from the balls of mud being hurled his way. It was keeping him from getting away from the bully's onslaught.
Hey, he's got something. Is that his demon treasure? I bet it's something he stole. If you can bullseye that, it's worth 100 points. Let's get that treasure.
I broke into a run, heading for the boy. Along the way, I used my magic to form a ball of mud, and the instant I was in firing range, I hurled it with all my might.
What the hell? He got in my eyes.
His buddies all turned their attention to me at once.
Who the heck are you? This ain't got nothing to do with you. Stay out of it. What are you? An ally of the demons or something?
Guess people like this were the same in every world. I'm no ally to the demons. I'm an ally to the weak. I gave them a haughty sneer. The other boys steeled themselves, drawing themselves up as if they were in the right.
Don't you try to act tough. Hey, he's that one night's kid. Ha! He's just a baby.
They'd figured out who I was.
You sure the son of a knight should be doing this sort of thing, huh? See, I told you that knight was on the demon's side. Well, let's get the others. Hey, guys. We've got some weirdo here.
Crap! These kids were calling for their friends, but no one showed up. Even still, my legs were locked in place. Sure, there were 3 of them, but it felt so pathetic, freezing up and having kids shout at me. Was mine just destined to be the saga of a bullied shut-in?
You shut up! Ganging up on a kid 3-1. You guys are the worst!
Their faces screwed up in confusion. Damn it.
Hey! You're the one who's shouting now, you dumbass!
I was pissed off, so I hurled another mud ball their way. I missed!
You little brat! Where the heck is he getting mud from? It doesn't matter. Just throw it back.
What I dished out was being returned 3-fold, but thanks to the footwork Paul had taught me, as well as a bit of magic, I was able to dodge the volley rather gracefully.
Hey! Knock it off. Yeah, you're not supposed to dodge.
Hey, if you can't hit me, that's your problem, fellas. The three boys continued to throw balls of mud my way for a while longer, but when it became apparent they weren't going to hit me, they threw up their hands as if they'd suddenly found something better to do.
Aw, this is boring. Yeah, let's go. And we're gonna let everyone know the Knight's kid is a demon lover.
They tried to make it sound like they hadn't lost, that they just decided to stop. With that, the little punks headed off for the other end of the field. I'd done it. For the very first time in my life, I'd beaten the bullies. Sheepish, or not to brag or anything. Arguments like that really weren't my strong suit after all. I'm glad things hadn't come to blows. For now, I needed to check on the kid they'd been throwing mud at.
Hey, are you all right? Are your things okay?
Whoa. The boy was so pretty it was hard to think we were around the same age. He had rather long eyelashes for someone so young, with a dainty little nose, thin lips, and a somewhat pointed jawline. His skin was porcelain white, and his features combined to give him the look of a startled rabbit in addition to a sense of unspeakable beauty. Man, if only Paul had been the prettier sort. Maybe I'd have a face like that. No! Paul wasn't bad looking, and Zenith looked really good, which meant my face was fine, certainly compared to my face in my past life, all flabby and marked with pimples. So, yeah, I was pretty good looking. Yeah. The boy turned his timid gaze back to me.
Yeah, I'm okay.
He made me want to protect and care for him, as if he were some small animal. If you were a lady who was into Shota stuff, he'd have your panties soaked on the spotter well if you could get past the way he was all caked in mud. His clothes were filthy, and mud clung to half of his face. The top of his head was basically a uniform brown. It bordered on miraculous that he'd managed to keep his basket safe. Here, why don't you set that down over there and kneel by the irrigation ditch?
Huh? Huh?
The boy blinked in confusion even as he began to do as I said. Guess he was the sort of kid who did what he was told. If he were the defiant sort, he would have fought back against those bullies earlier. He crawled over to the irrigation ditch, hunched on all fours as he peered into the water. If you're a guy who was into Shota stuff, you'd currently have a definite throbbing in your pants, too. Here, close your eyes. I used some fire magic to heat the water to an appropriate temperature, neither too hot nor too cold, but a nice warm 40 degrees Celsius. I then took some of it and doused the boy's head. I grabbed his collar as he squirmed and tried to get away, and proceeded to wash away the mud. He struggled at first, but as he got used to the water's temperature, he started to calm down. As for his clothes, those would have to be laundered at home. All right, that should about do it, I said. With the mud out of the way, I used fire magic to create hot wind like an air dryer, then took a handkerchief to carefully wipe the rest of the boy's face. In doing so, I could finally see his pointed, elf-like ears, as well as the emerald green hair he sported. I immediately remembered something Roxy had told me. If you ever see someone with emerald green hair, make sure you don't go anywhere near them. Wait, hold on. That wasn't quite right. I think it was, if you ever see someone with emerald green hair and what looks like a red jewel set in their forehead, make sure you don't go anywhere near them. Yeah, that was it. I'd forgotten a bit about the red jewel. This kid's forehead, however, was nothing but a smooth and pretty white. I was safe. He wasn't one of those nasty supers.
Thank you.
The boy's words of gratitude snapped me back into the moment. Dang, he was kind of giving me the tingles there. I decided to give him some advice. Listen, if you just roll over for people like that, they're never gonna leave you alone, you know.
I can't beat those guys.
You need to want to fight back. That's the key.
But they've always got bigger kids with them. And I don't want to get hurt.
Ah, so that was it. If he fought back, those kids would call for their friends, and they'd give him a thorough beating. No matter what world you lived in, that was a thing. Roxy had put in a lot of effort, so the grown-ups seemed to have accepted demons, but not the children. Kids could be so cruel. This right here wasn't too far from outright bigotry. You must have it rough, getting bullied just because the color of your hair makes you look like a super.
You're not bothered by it?
My teacher was a demon. What race do you belong to?
I don't know.
He didn't know? At his age? That was odd. Well, what race is your father?
He's a half-elf. His other half is human, he said.
And your mother?
She's human, but she also has some beastman blood in there, too.
The child of a half-elf and a quarter beastman? Did that explain his hair, then?
And so my dad, he tells me I'm not a demon, but my hair isn't the same color as his or my mom's.
He started to sob, and I reached over to reassuringly pat his head. If his hair color didn't match either of his parents, though that was a big deal, the possibility that his mother had had an affair occurred to me. Is your hair color the only thing that's different?
My ears are longer than my dad's, too.
I see. A demon race that had long ears and green hair sounded plausible enough. I mean, I didn't want to pry too hard into the affairs of a stranger's home life, but I'd been a bullied child myself, so I wanted to do something for him. Also, I just felt so bad for him, being bullied just for having green hair. Some of the bullying I'd experienced had been a result of stupid things I'd done, but not this kid. No amount of effort on his part could change how he'd been born. He'd been destined from birth to have mud balls pelted at him on the roadside just because his hair was a bit green. Ugh! Just thinking of it was enough to piss me off again. Does your dad treat you nicely?
Yeah, he's scary when he's mad, but he doesn't get mad if I behave.
And what about your mom?
She's nice.
His tone of voice indicated that he was telling the truth. Then again, I couldn't really know for sure without seeing for myself. All right, let's go, shall we?
Chico, where?
Wherever it is you're going.
Hey, stick with the kid, and his parents are bound to show up. That's like a law of nature.
Rue? Why are you coming with me?
Well, those guys from before might come back. I'll drive them off. Are you on your way home, or are you taking that basket someplace?
I'm, delivering in my dad's lunch.
His father was a half-elf, yeah? When elves turned up in stories, they tended to be long-lived and isolationist people with haughty dispositions who looked down on other races. They were skilled with the bow and also with magic. Water and wind magic were their forte. Oh, and they had long ears, of course. Roxy had said, that's largely accurate, though they aren't particularly isolationist. Were the majority of elven men and women super gorgeous in this world, too? No. Thinking of elves as all being super gorgeous was a crass Japanese preconception. The elves in Western games had faces that were too angular and pointed, and didn't look particularly gorgeous at all. Guess Japanese otaku and foreign normies had different sensibilities. In the case of this boy here, though, it was a given that his parents were hot.
So, why are you protecting me?
My father told me that I should be an ally to the weak.
But the other kids might exclude you because of it.
Maybe so. It was a common story, getting bullied for helping out a victim of bullying. If that happens, I'll just play with you. As of today, we're friends.
What?
Our chips were in the same pile now. The chain of bullying grew when the person being helped turned on their helper instead of being grateful and repaying that kindness. Granted, the reason for this kid being victimized was rooted in something deeper than that, so I doubted he'd flip and side with the bullies. Oh, are you usually too busy helping out around the house?
No, not really.
You know, this might work out nicely, him having a face like that. He was sure to draw in plenty of girls once he grew up. And if I stuck with him, the ones he didn't pick might come my way. My own face wasn't anything too special, but if you took two guys and stood them next to each other, the better one of them looked, the more ordinary looking the other guy appeared. And so girls who were less confident in themselves were sure to try for me. Besides, I'd prefer a girl who's a little unsure of herself as opposed to one who's brimming with confidence. This could work. Oh, that's right. I haven't gotten your name yet. I'm Rudeus.
Hi, I'm Sylph.
Sylph, huh? That's a nice name. Just like a spirit of the wind. At that, Sylph's face turned red, and he nodded. Yeah, Sylph's father was a very attractive man. He had pointed ears and blonde hair that almost glittered, and he was slender without lacking muscle definition. Certainly, he lived up to the name of half-elf, having inherited the best parts of both elf and human. He stood guard at a watchtower on the edge of the forest, a bow in one hand.
Father, I've brought your lunch.
Thank you, Phi, as always. Did you get bullied again today?
I'm okay, someone helped me out.
Sylph turned to look my way, and I bowed slightly. Nice to meet you. I'm Rudeus Greyrat.
Greyrat? As in Paul Greyrat?
Yes, sir. He's my father.
Ah, yes, I've heard of you. What a polite boy you are. Oh, you'll have to forgive me. I'm Laws. I typically hunt in these forests.
Based on what I'd heard, this watchtower was set up as a lookout post to keep monsters from making it out of the forest, and was staffed by men from the village around the clock. Naturally, Paul was on the roster as well, which explained why Laws knew him. I'm sure they'd talk to one another about their respective children.
I know how my kid must look, but it's just something from further back in our ancestry. I do hope you'll be friends with each other.
Of course, sir. And even if Sylph was a superd, it wouldn't change my attitude one bit. I stake my father's honor on it.
Those are impressive words for a boy your age. I'm kind of jealous that Paul has such a bright kid.
Being good at things as a child doesn't mean that person will keep being good at things as an adult. You don't need to be jealous now when there's still time for Sylph to grow up.
Heh, now I see what Paul was talking about.
What did my father say?
That talking to you makes one feel like an underqualified parent.
While we were talking, I felt a tug at the hem of my shirt. I looked, and Sylph was clutching it, his head cast down. I guessed a grown-up conversation like this was boring for children. Mr. Laws, can the two of us go play for a bit?